Chapter 6:19. Over the countless years, she had seen many heroes, high-spirited, cultured and refined, caring for the world, bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. She had seen countless geniuses and experts, those who thought themselves supreme, those who mingled with the light, those who shared the Kong bed with their wives and children. Of these people, only that man had ever made her feel fear. Even though she had already caught up to his cultivation level, even though she would often reveal an expression of ridicule and disdain when she mentioned that man, she had to admit that even today, that man's name still made her feel a tinge of fear. Perhaps it was because when she first faced that man, she was just an innocent, lively, and adorable little girl, completely ignorant of the ways of the world, while he was the supreme expert of the world, still alive but already destined to be recorded in the annals of history as the sovereign father of all emperors? His Majesty Taizong, you've already been dead for so many years. Are you still not willing to rest in peace? She raised her head to the starry sky, gazing at the place where the brightest star had once stood many years ago. After a very long silence, she creased her brow. This early autumn night was truly very long. It was very easy to think of old friends. When the Tianhai Divine Empress was thinking of Emperor Taizong, Zhou Tong was also thinking of that one-time principal of the Orthodox Academy, Shang Xingzhou. Zhou Tong was a pure evil person. He enjoyed the pain of his enemies and even his friends, though besides Xue Xingchuan, he had no true friends, but this did not mean that he was crazy or that there was something wrong with his head. On the contrary, he was more clear-headed and rational than the vast majority of people, and this was true evil. If he wanted to continue this beautiful life, he needed to protect his own position, needed to ensure that the Divine Empress's imperial throne could not be shaken. It now seemed that the person most likely to shake the Empress's imperial throne was naturally Chen Chongsheng. Perhaps in a few days, he would die, but Zhou Tong would not take this risk. He would just silently wait. This was a problem that Shang Xingzhou, the imperial clan, and countless other great powers had posed. He felt that he had already found the method to solve this problem, but he first had to find this problem. As he pondered how to solve this problem, his admiration for Shang Xingzhou deepened, and ultimately, he even felt reverence. This world was the world of the strong. One person could control a storm, one saint could shake the world. Shang Xingzhou was fully deserving of his title as an expert of the orthodox line of the orthodoxy. Although his reputation was not prominent and he did not enter the ranks of the storms, anyone could clearly see that he had assuredly stepped into the divine domain long ago, his strength unfathomable. However, what truly made Zhou Tong revere him was his deep plans and farsightedness. He had raised Chen Chongsheng in Xining village's old temple for 15 years. Without teaching him anything, he directly sent him to the capital and then wrote a letter to the Pope. He was still alive. This should have been the favor the Pope had shown him back then, but now it had become his weapon. As for the relationship between fellow disciples of the Orthodox orthodoxy, it was naturally also a weapon. As for Mei Li Sha, as a representative of the orthodoxy's conservative faction, an old man who wholeheartedly wanted to assist the imperial clan in regaining the throne, perhaps he had long since known of Chen Chongsheng's identity, thus he had been in such a rush, even somewhat like pulling up a seedling to help it grow. In a short span of 2 years, Chen Chongsheng had become the successor to the orthodoxy. In this way, when the Divine Empress wanted to kill Chen Chongsheng, the orthodoxy would assuredly protect Chen Chongsheng, and the alliance that was not so firm in the first place would naturally collapse. The Divine Empress would lose her greatest supporter, and the Chen imperial clan would naturally have hope of regaining the throne. Just the unremarkable matter of sending Chen Chongsheng to the capital had shattered the nearly 20 years of peace of the great Zhou dynasty. It was said that the saint treated the world as a chessboard, placing a piece without regret, but Shang Xingzhou dared to use the saint as a chess piece, to use the legacy of the orthodoxy as a method. As for emotions, experiences, and the hearts of people, these things were all at his fingertips, easily discarded. He truly was an extraordinary schemer. Of course, Zhou Tong had deduced all of this, because he was also a schemer. The more he admired Shang Xingzhou, the more he regretted that he had not killed Chen Chongqing earlier. What I want is not the process, but the result. He stood on the stone steps and gazed at his subordinates kneeling in the courtyard. Smiling, he said, "I don't care how you analyze and judge. I want to see him die." He was not a pervert, so whether it was when he was executing or abusing ministers, he would not deliberately pretend to be quiet and refined, nor would he wear a shy smile on his lips. When he smiled, it was usually because he felt that the development of the matter made him speechless, so speechless that he could only bitterly smile, just like now. That's a living person, and a famous one at that. Crucially, he's also a sick person, but in the end, none of you can find where he is? Zhou Tong gazed at his subordinates in the courtyard, but he did not finish speaking. Only he knew that Chen Chongqing was a person about to die. Whether he was a famous person, a sick person, or a person about to die, in the end, they were all people that were very easy to find. The Department for Purging officials had several thousand spies and even more informers, but even after spending half the night, they had still not been able to find this person. Zhou Tong truly couldn't help but want to laugh at this. Seeing the smile on their lord's face, not a single official of the Department for Purging officials in the courtyard felt relaxed, and there was certainly no one foolish enough to try and laugh along with him. The officials all had very pale complexions, their black hats unable to block out the starlight descending from the sky, making them seem particularly dismal. Zhou Tong gazed at the official kneeling at the very front, his smile fading as he calmly said, "The imperial court gives you the highest salary, so I naturally have the highest expectations of you." This official was a high official of the Department for Purging officials who specialized in intelligence. Normally, he could enter and leave the various ministries and the halls of the orthodoxy without restriction, so he was deeply revered. But now that his immediate superior had so indifferently mentioned his name, his body could not help but fiercely tremble. With high expectations came great disappointment. He knew that he had to do something, or else Lord Zhou Tong would assuredly use some other method to make him remember tonight's defeat. There was a crisp crack. It was the sound of a finger breaking. He had forcibly snapped off the pinky of his left hand, his face even paler, faintly showing signs of pain. His voice also began to tremble. "This lowly official is incapable. Your Excellency, please give me another hour. I will definitely find that person." Zhou Tong gazed at this official, his expression unchanged. On the side, Qing Jun frowned. In his view, just breaking off a pinky was far from a resolution. If it were one of his direct subordinates in the Redcoat Cavalry, he would definitely request that they cut off one of his arms. In Qing Jun's view, this broken finger made Lord Zhou Tong seem too merciful, but in the eyes of the officials of the Department for Purging officials in the courtyard, this was already an extremely clear and terrifying warning. The officials dispersed from the small courtyard, leading their subordinates as they once more began their search in the darkness of the capital. Their movements and mood were even faster and more tense than before. Using half the night without finding a single clue means that the other party has the ability to conceal his tracks. After all, he is the future pope. Qing Jun followed Zhou Tong back into the room and very respectfully poured a cup of tea for him. Suppressing his voice, he said, "In my view, rather than aimlessly searching like this, it's better to first figure out where he's going after leaving the Orthodox Academy, and then we can go there in advance to set up a trap." This small courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department had countless precious tea leaves prepared, but Zhou Tong had always only drunk one kind, the Great Crimson Gown from the south. At this moment, the pot was steeping the Great Crimson Gown, but because there wasn't enough time, the color of the tea poured into the cup was somewhat fainter. Zhou Tong gazed at the rippling color of the tea in the cup and said, "If we could guess where he was going, the Li Palace wouldn't be in such a rush." A sinister smile appeared on Qing Jun's face. "Then we'll just force him to show himself." Zhou Tong's gaze was still fixed on the teacup, as if he stared long enough, he would be able to see the color of the tea in the cup thicken. His expression did not change at Qing Jun's words. With a faint "oh," he asked, "How do we force him?" As the most arrogant member of the orthodox Eight Tigers, Qing Jun's methods were always simple and crude. Even if he wants to distance himself from this storm in the capital, he still has people he cares about. Qing Jun clenched his teeth and said, "Let's go capture a few students of the Orthodox Academy and a few peddlers of 100 Flowers Lane. Chop off their hands and feet and throw them on Vermilion Bird Street. I don't believe that he won't get wind of it." Zhou Tong suddenly smiled, as if the color of the tea in the cup had really thickened. The rich and fragrant great crimson gown looked like blood. Bloody and crude did not mean that it was ineffective. Zhou Tong glanced out the door. His subordinates understood and stealthily entered the darkness. He was confident that it wouldn't take long for this seemingly insane idea to spread throughout the capital, and it would also reach Chen Chongqing's ears. "Did you ever think that this represents an official declaration of war with the Li Palace? Back when Chen Chongqing came to my place to ask for people, the Orthodoxy's cavalry had me surrounded." Zhou Tong smiled at Qing Jun, his smile containing an extremely deep meaning. Qing Jun knew that his opponent wanted to know the degree of his resolve. He had thought things through very clearly. He was just like Zhou Tong. If the Divine Empress lost power, only death awaited him. Thus, tonight, he had personally come to the alley of the Northern Military Department. Disregarding his usual vigilance, he had placed all the Redcoat cavalry under the command of the Department for Purging officials. He looked at Zhou Tong, maintaining a humble attitude, yet filled with a sense of heroism. In a shrill voice, he said, "It's already either one of us lives or the other of us lives. We can't yield another step." No one could have imagined that Chen Chongqing had already returned to the Orthodox Academy. To put it more accurately, he had returned to that alley outside the Orthodox Academy. He had no idea of the bloody plan that the Department for Purging officials had just drawn up. He had not come to 100 Flowers Lane to prevent Zhou Tong from going crazy and attacking the students of the Orthodox Academy or the surrounding peddlers. He had something else to do. He stood in the shadows of 100 Flowers Lane, watching those indistinct figures, those of the Imperial Court and the Li Palace, before finally resting his gaze on that carriage at the end of the street. In the autumn of last year, the Tianhai clan and the Orthodoxy's new faction, in order to suppress the Orthodox Academy, had used the all-school martial exhibition proposal to send many experts to challenge it. It was a very interesting story. At that time, he had noticed that carriage at the end of the street. Every time there was a match, that carriage would assuredly appear. This carriage made no effort to conceal its identity, so everyone knew that it came from the Department for Purging officials. Just knowing was not enough. Zhixiu had specially investigated this carriage, and all the information he had found was now in his mind. The alley of the Northern Military Department was not narrow. In truth, it was a straight street that could accommodate 2 carriages running side by side. The office of the Department for Purging officials was also very large. Besides the sinister prison, there were also countless buildings. That famous small courtyard with blooming crabapples was in its deepest depth. It required a very long time to get from the outside of the office to this place, passing through countless inspections. The carriage that had returned from the Orthodox Academy drove straight into the yamen. Following the pebbled path inside, it passed the inspection and continued forward. Those fierce and terrifying 3-headed black hounds did not display any abnormalities. Finally, they arrived outside the small courtyard. It was late at night, but many people in the capital were unable to sleep, and the people in the small courtyard were no exception. Zhou Tong and Qing Jun were currently sitting opposite each other, drinking tea. It was unknown if they could taste the true flavor of the tea. As the announcement came from outside the courtyard, Qing Jun's mind somewhat roused. This carriage had brought back the latest news on the Orthodox Academy. He was very concerned about this matter. The courtyard gate was pushed open, footsteps could be heard, and then stopped. Presumably, the official had already stopped and was standing on the ground of the small courtyard. Qing Jun turned his head to glance at the courtyard. He realized that the official had his head slightly lowered and had no intention of reporting. He couldn't help but slightly frown. As an important minister of the imperial court, his reputation was extremely terrible, but his abilities were actually not bad. He was extremely strict with his subordinate. If it were a redcoat cavalry officer reporting to him so lazily, he would definitely have already thrown the teacup in his hand at them, not allowing them to dodge, but this was the alley of the Northern Military Department, not his territory. He seemed crude and ruthless, but he was actually very intelligent. He would never discipline his subordinates in front of Lord Zhou Tong. Just like before, he felt that the punishment of that official of the department for purging officials breaking his pinky finger was too light, so he said nothing. He also maintained his calm. But in the next moment, he found it impossible to maintain his calm, because the official in the courtyard had raised his head. It was a very young face. Qing Jun stood up in shock. Zhou Tong turned to look at the courtyard, his pupils constricting as a chill suddenly arose. Chen Chongqing. The person who had come was Chen Chongqing. The entire capital was searching for him. After searching for him for an entire night, not a single person knew of his whereabouts. The assassins and killers of the department for purging officials were searching everywhere for him, but he had appeared in the department for purging officials. What did he want to do? Zhou Tong calmly gazed at the young man in the courtyard. Without a word, he slowly put down the teacup in his hand. The great crimson gown in the teacup had been steeped for some time, the color of the soup as thick as blood and dazzling to the eyes. Chen Chongqing calmly gazed at him, his right hand rising, gripping the hilt of his sword in the autumn wind at his waist. In this long autumn night, Zhou Tong had been searching for him, wanting to kill him. Little did he know that he was also searching for Zhou Tong, wanting to kill him. Chapter 620. Chen Chongqing stood in the courtyard, gazing at the two people in the room. He had only met Zhou Tong a few times and was not familiar with him. He did not even recognize the other person, but there were not many people that could sit and drink tea with Zhou Tong in the middle of the night. He could roughly guess at that person's identity, so he had a reason to die. He had come to kill Zhou Tong, because he was about to die. Before death, one had to do a few things that followed one's heart. This could be called one's final madness, and it could also be called a firework before the curtain fell. He was the successor to the orthodoxy. Actively or passively, he had many enemies and opponents, but there were truly not many people that he wanted to kill. He had no enemies. There were no demons in the capital. Liang Xiaoxiao had committed suicide, Zhuang Huanyu had committed suicide, so only Zhou Tong was left. Zhixiu had been imprisoned in Zhou prison for a very long time and tortured to a state too horrible to look at. When he saw the wounds on Zhixiu's body in the carriage, he had secretly resolved to kill Zhou Tong. Everyone in the Orthodox Academy knew that Zhixiu had stayed in the capital to do this. Chen Chongqing had decided to do this for him, because Zhou Tong had tortured Zhixiu precisely because of his relationship with the Orthodox Academy. Besides this, there were many other reasons to kill Zhou Tong, but there was no need to mention them. In the end, it was just a wish. Chen Chongqing just wanted a person like Zhou Tong to die. In this world, countless people wanted Zhou Tong to die. They had wanted this for many years, but not many people dared to do it. Chen Chongqing dared. According to Zhixiu's plan, he had snuck under the carriage and smoothly passed through several inspections. He had relied on his special physique to hide from those sinister and terrifying Cerberuses and had not triggered the array of Zhou prison. Finally, he had succeeded in arriving at this small courtyard and standing in front of Zhou Tong. But could he kill him? Zhou Tong's terror did not merely lie in his personality and methods. In the last few years, he had raided the manors of countless princes and dukes, obtained countless techniques and secret manuals, and had long since entered the upper level of star condensation. There were even rumors that he had cultivated to the peak of star condensation. The Great Crimson Gown's secret mental technique was sinister and terrifying to the extreme. In the years before the Divine Empress had ascended to the throne, the experts dispatched by the imperial clan and those people with lofty ideals who swore vengeance for the innocents who had died miserable deaths in Zhou prison had attempted to assassinate him countless times, but he was still alive and well. The facts of the last few years had long since proved that no one could kill Zhou Tong. No matter how astonishing Chen Chongqing's talent in cultivation was, he was still too young and his cultivation was only at the peak of ethereal opening. Moreover, after failing to break through on Mount Han, his injuries had not yet healed, so what gave him the confidence to charge here and kill Zhou Tong? Qing Jun looked at the young man in the courtyard and thought about these things. Chen Chongqing was also thinking about these things. They were all mental activities, silent and unmoving. As he thought of these things, Chen Chongqing's movements did not stop. He unsheathed the stainless sword and reversed its sheath. Back in Xuanyang City, when confronting Zhu Luo, Wang Pe had done this, and he had also done this. The short sword grew longer and sharper. It was like a spear in his hand, ready to face the battlefield. This showed that he was very cautious and very determined. He looked at Zhou Tong. He didn't even glance at the person next to Zhou Tong. He didn't know that this person was the leader of the Redcoat Cavalry, Qing Jun, also a middle-level star condensation expert. This was not contempt, this was disregard. The person he wanted to kill was Zhou Tong. Anyone who blocked his sword had to die, no matter who or how strong. Qing Jun sensed that killing intent. He had never imagined that on such a young, even somewhat inexperienced face, he could see such a calm and firm will. And he had never imagined that in this small courtyard of the Department for Purging officials, there would actually be someone who dared to release such a certain killing intent towards Zhou Tong. This killing intent was not directed at him, but he was right next to Zhou Tong, even a little closer to Chen Chongqing than Zhou Tong. As a result, his face instantly paled. Not because of fear, but because of wariness, because of the heaviness of his heart, and also because he took a deep breath. He was originally one of the few middle-level star condensation experts of the capital. At this moment, his true essence exploded, and as he breathed, the crabapple trees in the courtyard madly swayed despite the lack of wind. Countless strands of the night wind were sucked into his lungs. His abdomen slightly bulged like a war drum. A shrill cry, like the cry of an eagle, burst from his lips. This shrill cry instantly tore through the night sky, spreading throughout all of Zhou prison, perhaps even to every corner of the capital. Qing Jun felt that he should not be afraid of Chen Chongqing, even if he was the future pope. This was because Chen Chongqing was too young. His cultivation level was already inconceivably high among his peers, but it was still far inferior to Qing Jun's. Moreover, the injuries in his body had probably not healed, but he was very afraid of death. As the leader of the great Zhou dynasty's Redcoat Cavalry, he had colluded with Zhou Tong in the last few years, carrying out the Empress's decree or falsely using the Empress's decree to kill countless nobles and ministers, scholars and priests, wealthy merchants and celebrities, and innocent commoners. He had seen far too many dead people, so he grew more and more afraid of death. Moreover, he was a very intelligent person who understood his own position and would never look down on any opponent. Everyone said that Chen Chongqing had failed at star condensation in Mount Han, but he was still the future pope, a true genius. Qing Jun felt that no matter how much importance he placed on this young man, it was not excessive. Thus, he immediately chose to shriek and move the capital. With the shriek, Chen Chongqing moved. Before the sound of his footsteps could even be heard, they were torn apart by the crushed stone tiles beneath his boots, and then pierced through by the flying gravel, leaving behind only a few buzzing sounds. His body suddenly became illusory. With a howl of wind, he shot up the stone steps like an arrow, the sword in his hand thrusting straight forward. Swish! The sound of this sword was extremely pure, without the slightest noise, seeming especially clean. Because his sword had just thrusted straight forward, without the slightest deviation or variation. To put it another way, this sword of his had no technique. Chen Chongqing's swordplay had been inherited from Su Li, but it had its own style. After the stormy battle in Xuanyang City, especially the several dozen sword battles in front of the Orthodox Academy last autumn and his battle with Su Yorong on the Bridge of Helplessness, the entire continent had no choice but to admit that his talent in the path of the sword had already reached a world-shaking level. If not for the fact that he was too young, he would even have the right to be called a grandmaster of the path of the sword. But tonight, when he came to assassinate Zhou Tong, his first sword was actually so simple, without any sword technique to speak of. It was just that it was incomparably straight, incomparably swift. It was like a straight line had been drawn between the lights of the courtyard and the room, and at the end of this straight line was Zhou Tong. At this moment, Qing Jun was still standing in this line. Chen Chongqing's sword was very fast, very sharp, but to a middle-level star condensation expert like him, it was not difficult to deal with. He could rely on his movement techniques to temporarily dodge, and then seize the opportunity to counterattack. Of course, the simplest method was to use his star domain to forcefully receive it. But Qing Jun chose to dodge without the slightest hesitation. Because the will of Chen Chongqing's sword was too powerful, its edge too brilliant. The dim yellow light in the room suddenly dimmed. Qing Jun's body was like a wisp of black smoke, drifting to the right, avoiding this sword. His face was somewhat pale, his expression somewhat panicked. This was precisely the scene that Chen Chongqing wanted to see the most. He had never imagined that this sword could stab this person to death. This sword of his had never been aimed at this person. He did not know this person's name, so he did not mind casually stabbing this person to death. However, this was a sword that was filled with his mind and will. Landing it on this person's body was a complete waste. His sword had to land on Zhou Tong's body. Perhaps it was because the sword light was too bright, but the dim light in the room suddenly became much brighter. Seeing the sword coming at him, Zhou Tong's face also paled, not out of fear or unease, but out of disdain and anger. He was keenly aware that this seemingly simple sword of Chen Chongqing's was actually not simple at all. Countless transformations were concealed behind it. Those transformations were assuredly extremely exquisite and complex, containing all of Chen Chongqing's comprehension of the path of the sword. Not even he could see them clearly in advance. But he was not afraid, not even worried. He remained calm, composed, and confident, because the difference in cultivation between him and Chen Chongqing was too great. No matter how inconceivable Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword was, it could not make up for this. He simply would not compete with Chen Chongqing on the path of the sword. He simply would not give Chen Chongqing the chance to display the sword energy concealed in this straight sword and the subsequent sword technique. He directly chose to use his unfathomable cultivation to crush his opponent into a ghost in a sea of blood. A clear clang resounded through the room. It was the sound of Zhou Tong's pale fingers tapping on the teacup. The porcelain teacup and the fingertips that had dug out who knew how many eyes met, but the sound it produced was so clear and bright. The tea in the cup began to ripple. The tea was a tribute from the south, the best great crimson pow. Tonight, this tea had already been brewed for too long. It was a little excessive, the color of the tea extremely red, just like blood. When the tea swayed, the sea of blood rippled. The light in the room suddenly turned red. A sea of blood appeared in the room. The table, the teapot, and the teacup were all swallowed by the sea of blood. The pungent smell of blood, along with the roiling of the sea of blood, spread in all directions. Even the green leaves of the crabapple tree outside the courtyard had turned red, as if they had been watered by blood for countless years. In this world of blood, Zhou Tong's pale face seemed especially dazzling and abnormally terrifying. In the blink of an eye, his spiritual sense had already enveloped the world in a circumference of several hundred zhang, turning the real world into a sea of blood. This sea of blood constantly soaked into the red official's robe on his body, causing the color of the official's robe to grow deeper and deeper, causing one to feel nauseous upon seeing it. Within the sea of blood, there seemed to be countless vengeful spirits wailing and cursing for help. Chen Chongqing's sword was still 3 feet away from Zhou Tong, but these voices had already entered his ears. At the same time he heard these cries of pain, a powerful and terrifying qi, brimming with killing intent and pain, directly invaded his sea of consciousness. This was Zhou Tong's most terrifying secret mental technique, Great Crimson Pow. Everything has already been decided, everything has already been decided. I never fight a battle unprepared. Chapter 621. Last autumn, on the first day of the all-school martial exhibition, Chen Chongqing broke through Zhou Ziheng's star domain in front of the Tradition Academy's gate. Using the unfinished sword momentum, he brought Tang 36 and Xian Yuan Po and drove a long carriage straight into the alley of the Northern Military Department. They arrived at the courtyard where the begonia flowers had fallen and directly asked Zhou Tong to let them go. At the time, Zhou Tong had looked at them expressionlessly, and they had seen the sea of blood. Regardless of whether it was him or Tang 36, neither of them could endure the mental pressure and pain, almost collapsing. Even after leaving this courtyard for a long time, they still could not forget the fear and terror brought about by that sea of blood. And at that time, Zhou Tong had only released a portion of his pressure, not directly attacking like he was doing now. It must be known that when Zhou Tong used the secret technique of the Great Crimson Gown with all his strength, even if his opponent was an upper-level star condensation expert, probably only an abnormal human like Painted Armor Xiao Zhang, who was constantly in a state of madness, would not be affected in any way. Even a person like Liang Wangsun would choose to temporarily guard his mind. Chen Chongqing was only at the peak of ethereal opening. No matter how stable and powerful his divine sense was, no matter how much improvement he had made in this 1 year, how could he withstand this sea of blood? From the looks of it, either his consciousness would be directly destroyed by Zhou Tong's mental attack, or he would be lucky enough to maintain his consciousness. He had to withdraw his sword and retreat, doing his best to get as far away as possible. To cultivators, Zhou Tong's sea of blood was a sea of bitterness. If they couldn't escape it, then they could only sink into oblivion. But even if he chose to put away his sword and leave, could he really leave this courtyard? No one had expected what happened next. Chen Chongqing's face was pale, but he didn't choose to escape, nor did he collapse. His body turned from illusory to solid, and his speed became many times slower, but he still held his sword and stabbed forward. He felt as if he was walking in a waist-deep sea of viscous blood. Although it was difficult and slow, he did not stop. Zhou Tong's pupils constricted as he gazed at the bright light that was gradually tearing apart the sea of blood, the bright sword glow coming from the stainless sword. Why was Chen Chongqing's divine sense so strong? More than 2 years ago, there was only Chen Chongqing in the Tradition Academy. He chose his fated star in the library. His soul consciousness swaggered up to the 9 heavens, reaching the depths of the sea of stars. At the time, the Divine Empress and Mo had a conversation on the dew platform. His divine sense was very strong, but it wasn't exaggerated. What truly stood out was that his expression was very calm. Peace was the only way to achieve greatness. They could travel as far as they wanted. Now, besides being tranquil, his divine sense was even more tenacious. In this 1 year, he had used the 10,000 sword wills in the vault sheath to cleanse his consciousness countless times. His soul consciousness had crossed the ocean of sword intent countless times and touched the black stone tablet on the other side, but he had never lost his way. How could Zhou Tong's sea of blood cause his consciousness to sink into it? He also wore a string of stone pearls on his wrist. There were not many stone pearls, but each one was a heavenly tome monolith. At this moment, these stone pearls were faintly glowing, protecting his Tao heart. Apart from these reasons, the most important one was still himself. His mental state was at the absolute peak of his 17 years of life. He knew he was going to die, and he walked towards it. He faced death to live, and once he calmed down, he was fearless. Very few people could have such an experience. Of course, he believed that no one would want to have such an experience. It could even be said that he had already seen through life and death, at least in these past few days. So he was able to resist Zhou Tong's secret mental attack, able to persevere through the sticky and terrifying sea of blood. At the end, the sword glow finally illuminated the room. The sword energy finally cleaved a path through the sea of blood, arriving in front of Zhou Tong. Zhou Tong's deep and serene eyes were illuminated by the sword glow, a hint of regret faintly visible. He knew that Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword was extremely profound, so he did not want to tangle with Chen Chongqing in this aspect. He only wanted to use his most powerful technique to resolve everything in the shortest amount of time possible, so he did not hesitate to allow Chen Chongqing to increase his sword intent, choosing to use a secret mental technique to attack through space. Yet he had not expected Chen Chongqing's spiritual sense to be so powerful that it could forcibly block the great crimson gown and break through the sea of blood. As a result, that incomparably sharp sword had already arrived in front of him. A sliver of wariness appeared in Zhou Tong's eyes. Even an upper-level star condensation expert could not ignore the sword in Chen Chongqing's hand. From the snowy plains to Xuanyang City, from the capital to Mount Han, from Shuihe to Liang Hongzhuang, from Lin Pingyuan to Zhou Ziheng, far too many star condensation experts had been defeated by Chen Chongqing's sword. But there was still no fear in Zhou Tong's eyes, because he was no ordinary star condensation expert, he was a peak star condensation expert. His cultivation was much higher than Chen Chongqing's. Even if he had a problem with his response and allowed Chen Chongqing's sword to arrive in front of him, he still had nothing to worry about, because the space in front of him was his world. Countless stars began to shine from within the blood-red official's gown. They were not silver, but also the color of blood. The sea of blood that enveloped Zhou prison suddenly receded like a receding tide, then condensed into a sphere of blood. This sphere of blood was so real, like it had really been condensed from fresh blood. The crabapple tree in the courtyard regained its green color, but as if it had fallen ill, countless leaves began to fall. Countless dried-up insect corpses appeared in the cracks of the stone step. Zhou Tong's body was immersed in this sphere of blood, an extremely bizarre sight. This sphere of blood was his star domain. This was his world. Zhou Tong's face was very pale, faintly discernible in and out of the blood, sometimes sinking and sometimes floating. The blood began to boil, emitting an unpleasant stench of blood. Anyone who smelled this stench would easily lose their soul and sink into a state of madness until their soul left their body and died. Qing Jun had retreated to the back of the room, so he was not affected. As he watched this sight, his eyes were filled with fear. Chen Chongqing had bathed in dragon blood, and his stainless body had always been special, so he was not affected. He continued to stab at the sphere of blood. Zhou Tong's pale face was even more distinct in the mist of blood. He stared at the sword glow and Chen Chongqing, his eyes indifferent. The star domain of the peak of star condensation could be said to be infinitely close to perfection. There was almost no weak spot, let alone a hole. How could Chen Chongqing's sword break through this sea of blood? The stainless sword was clearly stabbing at Zhou Tong's throat, but no one noticed that in the space above them, a sword glow had appeared. Swish! The sword glow pierced through the sea of blood, stabbing straight at his left eye. Zhou Tong's callous lips emitted a fierce howl as his sleeves swiftly danced. The crimson official's robe incessantly trembled, like the waves of a sea of blood. The immortal birds and monsters drawn on the official's robe seemed to come to life. From the depths of the sea of blood surged an innumerable number of faceless and bodiless vengeful spirits. With mournful and resentful shrieks, they lunged at the sword image. The bright sword glow easily tore those vengeful spirits to pieces and continued forward, stabbing into Zhou Tong's left shoulder. With a light swish, a jet of blood shot out. The perfect star domain of a peak star condensation expert had actually been broken. Looking at this scene that was completely impossible, Qing Jun's face paled, his body trembled, and he was completely unable to speak. Yes, this was originally something that should not have happened, but when the person wielding the sword was Chen Chongqing, this kind of thing seemed to become understandable. Without the slightest exaggeration, in the countless years from the distant past to the present, he was the one who had used his ethereal opening body to surpass cultivation levels and break through star condensation. This was because in the mausoleum of books, he had understood the relationship between the multitude of stars in the sky and the star domain of cultivators. In the wastelands of the north, Su Li had taught him a sword style, giving him a pair of wise eyes that could see through the star domain. The intellectual sword was a sword style or combat method that consumed a great deal of spiritual sense and mental strength. It was a method that Su Li had taught him specifically for breaking through the star domain. The key point of this sword style was to comprehend the relationship between the starry sky and living beings, thereby calculating the holes in a cultivator's star domain. Chen Chongqing's experience of comprehending the monoliths in the mausoleum of books was different from others, so although his calculating abilities were inferior to Su Yorong's and Su Li's, his comprehension of the intellectual sword was not any weaker. Starting from the Plum Garden Inn, he had always been calculating in order to find, or perhaps guess, the weak point of Zhou Tong's sea of blood. His sword had long since been unsheathed, so how could it miss? Blood flew, sword intent exploded, and the temperature in the courtyard rapidly rose. Chen Chongqing knew that there was an enormous gap between his and Zhou Tong's true cultivation levels. Once he succeeded, he did not dare to tarry. Using his spiritual sense, he ignited the star radiance and fragments in his body, transforming them into an unimaginable amount of true essence that surged forward through the stainless sword. The stainless sword grew even brighter, exuding a pure and holy white light and heat, as if it would destroy Zhou Tong's life force in the next moment. Yet in the next moment, this scene did not occur. The straight sword had clearly pierced through the sea of blood, stabbed into Zhou Tong's body, but now it seemed to stab into nothingness, as if there was nothing before the edge of the sword. Zhou Tong's true body was actually not in the sea of blood. His crimson official's robe lightly fluttered in the night wind. At some point, he had floated into the air above the room, exuding a bloody and terrifying pressure. A ball of blood appeared in the palm of his right hand. Was this his star domain of the sea of blood? The star domain was the most powerful defensive method of star condensation cultivators. It could be said to be their world. Just who could leave their own world and then grasp that world in their hands? Chen Chongqing had seen similar records in the Taoist canon, but he had never encountered it in a real battle. This was the first time he had seen such a scene. Zhou Tong had left his own world, transforming the star domain of the sea of blood into a ball of blood in his palm. This also meant that although Chen Chongqing had gone through incomparably complicated and arduous calculations to use the intellectual sword to destroy his opponent's star domain, he was already incapable of harming his opponent's body. On the contrary, his sword had entered the sea of blood, which was equivalent to being grasped in Zhou Tong's hand, making it impossible for him to stab forward. Through the feeling transmitted back to him by the edge of the sword, Chen Chongqing very quickly confirmed this chilling fact. Zhou Tong looked down at him from above, expressionlessly asking, "This is that sword?" From the moment he decided to kill Chen Chongqing, even before last summer, he had begun to collect all the information on Chen Chongqing. That carriage had always been parked in 100 Flowers Lane. He knew what Chen Chongqing had done in the wilderness and in Xuanyang City. He knew that Su Li had taught him 3 sword styles, and he even knew that the key to one of these sword styles lay in calculation. Since he knew, as the continent's most famous schemer, a powerful figure skilled in scheming, how could he not calculate how Chen Chongqing would attack? The sea of blood that he had spread out was real, and the fact that it had been broken by Chen Chongqing was also real. His response had been very risky, even though he had already prepared a backup plan. All of this had been for a single goal. He wanted to cripple Chen Chongqing's sword. Chapter 622. It was said that Chen Chongqing was a cultivation genius. After many things had happened in the past 2 years, this conclusion had been publicly acknowledged by the entire continent. But in truth, many people did not know which aspect was his strongest. Was it the quantity of true essence or the ability to perceive? Of course, being able to read through the Taoist canon was a very impressive thing, but between the accumulation of knowledge and the ability to fight, some specific methods were needed as a bridge. Only after sending Su Li back 10,000 li to the south, the several dozen sword battles in front of the Orthodox Academy, and the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, these 3 major events, did the people gradually confirm that Chen Chongqing's strongest aspect was his sword. This caused many people, especially the priests of the Orthodoxy, to feel somewhat surprised and even faintly uneasy. The Orthodoxy naturally also had sword styles, such as the true sword of the Orthodoxy, the Heavenly Tao Academy's sword of Hithering Light, or the Temple sword of the Southern Department, but the Orthodoxy's resources were even more reflected in other aspects. As the successor to the Pope, what Chen Chongqing was most skilled in was not the divine arts of the Orthodoxy, nor was it the Taoist techniques of the Taoist canon, but the sword techniques of Mount Li. Zhou Tong saw Chen Chongqing even more clearly. He knew that Chen Chongqing's strength lay not only in his talent in the way of the sword, but also in his sword itself. He vaguely knew that Chen Chongqing had had a fortuitous encounter in the sword pool of the Garden of Zhou. He had attempted to send people to find where those famed swords had been hidden, but after more than a year had passed, the spies of the Department for Purging officials who had spread throughout the world had ultimately only found one sword in the latrine of the Orthodox Academy. The other famed swords had all disappeared without a trace, causing him to be very vigilant. What he was even more wary of was the sword placed in front of him, the sword that Chen Chongqing was currently holding in his hand. The stainless sword was the newest divine weapon on the tier of legendary weapons. There was nothing special about this dagger, other than its sharpness. However, just as the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had said, anything that was unleashed to the extreme would be especially terrifying. This dagger was far too sharp. It could easily pierce through the divine artifact of the Tianhai clan, the 6 Protections divine armor. Although Zhou Tong was a powerful expert at the peak of star condensation, his body as tough as steel, he did not dare to test the sword with his body. Moreover, he didn't want Chen Chongqing to fully display his sword cultivation. Therefore, the moment he saw Chen Chongqing raise his head in the room, he had already decided on how to deal with him. He spread out his star domain of Blood Sea and waited for Chen Chongqing to break it with his sword. He used an extremely risky and consuming method to forcefully leave his own world and hold the Blood Sea in his hand. Chen Chongqing's sword was in the sea of blood, held in his hand, tightly controlled by the pressure. No matter how sharp that sword was, it could not touch his body and soul. No matter how profound Chen Chongqing's sword path was, there was no room for it to be used. At this point, Chen Chongqing's intellectual swords all fell into the air, and then fell into his calculation. Feeling the boundless power from the edge of the sword, feeling the bloody and terrifying pressure, Chen Chongqing's face became abnormally pale as he raised his eyes to look at the crimson official's robe dancing in the air of the room. The intellectual sword that had been unsheathed at the Plum Garden Inn had consumed too much of his psyche power and obsession. This was the first time since he started learning swordsmanship in the wilderness that his intellectual sword was completely ineffective. His sword was in the hands of a powerful enemy, and his sword Dao was stuck in the sea of blood, unable to be used. His face paled, perhaps because he had lost too much of his psyche power, or because he had lost his confidence. The stainless sword had been infected by the sea of blood and was no longer as bright as before, making it impossible for him to continue using his own sword technique. However, he still had a sword technique that he could use without needing to move. His spiritual sense fell on the snowy plains outside his ethereal palace. The snowflakes condensed from star radiance madly danced in the air, and then instantly ignited. In an extremely short period of time, they exploded with boundless light and heat. A powerful qi and a seemingly tangible flame exploded from the edge of the sword, attempting to break through the foul ball of blood in Zhou Tong's palm. A loud boom resounded. A gale howled through the room. Countless rays of light burst out from Zhou Tong's fingers, making it seem like the bones of his fingers could be seen. The pearl of blood sea wrapped around the dagger trembled uneasily, its surface fiercely heaving up and down. From time to time, a few drops of blood would fly out. When the blood landed on the ground, it would corrode the hard stone floor and hiss. Zhou Tong's expression turned solemn. He knew that Chen Chongqing had a sword technique that could greatly increase the output of true essence, but he had not expected that this sword would be so berserk. A harsh howl once more burst out from his thin and stern lips. The night wind howled in from outside the room, causing his crimson official's gown to flap in the wind. An extremely callous and powerful qi appeared. As his crimson official's gown madly danced, Zhou Tong's figure seemed to grow several times larger, bursting through the back half of the room and transforming into a Dharma idol 10 some zhang tall. Chen Chongqing's sword madly surged with light and heat, sword intent and killing intent. Countless bright rays of light and invisible sword intents shot out from Zhou Tong's fingers, cutting away countless pieces of stone from the walls of the room. Yet his sword was still unable to truly break through Zhou Tong's palm, unable to escape from the pearl of blood formed from the star domain of blood. This was the unbridgeable gap between the peak of star condensation and the peak of ethereal opening. No matter how high Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword was, no matter how sharp the stainless sword was, it still seemed to be helpless. In front of Zhou Tong's Dharma idol that seemed like a demon god, standing on the ground, Chen Chongqing seemed so insignificant, like an ant. The light and sword intent exuded by the sword in his hand seemed so dim in Zhou Tong's palm, like the light of a firefly that could be extinguished at any moment. Would this assassination on this early autumn night end just like this? Chen Chongqing's approach to death to live would ultimately still be helplessly welcoming death? No, although it was just the light of a firefly, as long as there were enough of it, it could still illuminate the night, until it finally set the plains ablaze, even the heavens aflame. The blazing sword that Su Li had taught him was drawn from the secret sword of the Golden Crow and used the energy of the Burning Heaven sword. However, its true energy came from the final move of the Mount Li sword style. The special characteristic of that sword was disregarding life. When Chen Chongqing came today to kill Zhou Tong, he had never thought that he would be able to return alive. He was truly approaching death to live, and he had long ago cast aside life and death. He knew that he was about to die, so he was naturally more disregarding life than anyone else. If there really was a so-called heavenly Tao in the starry sky, then it should be able to sense his current mood. If there really was a so-called fate in the starry sky, then his fate was still in his hands. Suddenly, another extremely small firefly appeared, right on his wrist. This firefly grew brighter and brighter, until it became a star. Soon after, many more similar lights appeared on his body, as if stars were being lit up one after another. The places where these stars appeared were all his chi openings. In Mount Han, he had once done something similar. At the time, he had almost died. But in any case, he was already going to die. He had always been prepared to die, so how could he care about these things? He had long since made his preparations to once more light up those chi openings in this courtyard filled with crabapple blossoms, allowing the sea of stars to once more descend upon his body. Star radiance descended from the sky, noiselessly passing through the dilapidated house and falling upon his body, causing those stars on his body to grow even brighter. Countless stars were faintly discernible in the sleeves of his clothes, connecting into lines, connecting into sheets, transforming into a star chart, condensing into a star domain. After Mount Han, Chen Chongqing had once more condensed his star. Zhou Tong's expression subtly changed. He knew that in Mount Han, Chen Chongqing had been heavily injured precisely because he had attempted to condense his star, but he had never expected that at this moment, Chen Chongqing would once more attempt to condense his star, and that he would actually succeed. The starlight retreated into Chen Chongqing's body, but his qi did not drop. On the contrary, it suddenly rose, blocking the pressure of the sea of blood. The light and heat bursting from the edge of the sword seemed to want to incinerate the sphere of blood in Zhou Tong's palm, and those sword intents were already beginning to show signs of piercing through the sphere of blood. Zhou Tong's complexion paled, the hairband of his black hair snapped and madly danced in the night wind. His chi rose once more, and he forcefully grasped those sword intents in his hand. As long as Chen Chongqing's stainless sword could not break through his star domain of blood, there was no possibility of him losing this battle. If the battle continued like this, with Chen Chongqing's sword restrained and unable to increase its edge, it truly was impossible for him to break through Zhou Tong's sea of blood. Even if he succeeded in condensing his star, he was still only at the initial level of star condensation, still very far from the peak of star condensation. But just because he could not move the stainless sword did not mean that he could not attack, because the sheath of the sword known as the vault sheath still concealed countless sword. With a swish, the space in the room seemed to be cut open. Tensome clear sword slashes appeared on the trunk of the crabapple tree outside the room. An ancient sword flew out from the sheath in his hand. Following the blade of the stainless sword, it stabbed into the sea of blood in Zhou Tong's palm. This sword was called the Yu Maiden Sword, the famed sword that Mo Yu had wanted from him but was unable to obtain. This sword had once slumbered in the sea of grass in the garden of Zhou for several centuries. It had long since rusted and no longer possessed its intimidating luster of the past, but after 2 years of nourishment in the vault sheath, it had already regained its former edge. With a whoosh, the Yu Maiden sword stabbed into the sea of blood. Soon after, countless swords flew out from the sheath, charging wave after wave at the sea of blood. Over the centuries, the sword pool of the Garden of Zhou had buried more than 10,000 famed swords. Only when Chen Chongqing brought the yellow paper umbrella to the plains did these swords awaken. Together with Chen Chongqing, they battled the monster tide, broke the sole pivot of the mausoleum of Zhou, and then held up the vault of heaven. Finally, they left the Garden of Zhou with him, returning to the world they had left a long time ago. Many famed swords returned to their former sex, like the temple sword, or the sword of spiritual light. Some swords encountered lucky chances, like the Mountain Sea Sword and the Demon Commander's Banner Sword. Many swords were hidden in various corners of the Orthodox Academy by a certain person, and many swords had always remained by Chen Chongqing's side. There were at least 6,000 of them. As comrades and comrades, today, Chen Chongqing was about to challenge the most powerful and terrifying enemy of his life. In the face of this most difficult and dangerous situation, how could they be willing to fall behind? The swords all left their sheaths and rushed forward, striving to outdo each other. For a moment, the entire courtyard was suffused with an awe-inspiring sword intent. Let alone the crabapple trees, even the hard stone tiles were marked with countless perfectly straight sword slashes. Qing Jun shrieked in fear. His cultivation suddenly rose, his two palms shielding his body like two iron plates as he fled to the back of the house. First of all, it's only natural to be in the middle again. This is our old hobby, or perhaps we should say our old shamelessness. Secondly, yesterday, little Nan received his marriage certificate. Dun Huai's son is 1 year old. His old comrades are all making new contributions. How can there be no clothes to wear? Wearing the same robe as shrimps. It's rather emotional, reminiscing the past and looking forward to the future. Everything will be better, choosing heaven's will be even better, and everyone will be even happier. Chapter 6:23. Countless sword glows surged out of the vault sheath and bombarded the sea of blood. Either mournful or muffled sounds of collisions and cutting rang out one after another. Dazzling light illuminated the gloomy courtyard, illuminating the broken walls, the scarred crabapple tree, illuminating the viscous sea of blood, and also illuminating Zhou Tong's pale face. The swords were like countless meteors descending from the heavens, carrying with them a frightening light and heat as they incessantly stabbed at the sea of blood and pressure. Zhou Tong's cultivation was already at the peak of star condensation, so he had long since prepared for Chen Chongqing's moves. Chen Chongqing's intellectual sword was unable to find a true flaw and was instead suppressed, but how could his star domain endure the bombardment of so many swords? No matter how nearly perfect it was still not true perfection. As long as there was a flaw, it would definitely be pierced through. The sea of blood condensed into a ball of blood, trapping the peerlessly sharp stainless sword within. Under the assault of countless sword glows, it began to show signs of breaking. There was a light clap, like a leather bag filled with wine being pierced by a sharp sword, or like a paper window being lightly pierced by a finger. The sea of blood had been broken. Zhou Tong's face became abnormally pale, his eyes growing increasingly serene, a tinge of fear appearing in their depths. Countless sword glows pierced through the sea of blood, carrying with them an awe-inspiring sword intent as they fell upon his body. Amidst the mournful sounds of swords cutting, countless real streams of blood shot into the darkness, accompanied by a furious and pained howl. In the blink of an eye, Zhou Tong's body was covered in several hundred sword wounds. Blood flowed from these wounds, and one could even faintly make out his awe-inspiring white bones. Zhou Tong knew that Chen Chongqing had many swords, and he had also thought that Chen Chongqing might have placed his swords in that sheath called the vault sheath, but he could never have imagined that Chen Chongqing had the ability to simultaneously control so many swords. It must be known that these swords were all heirlooms that had once enjoyed an illustrious reputation in the world, so how could they be controlled by a youth who had just entered the initial level of star condensation? Blood madly spurted through the courtyard, flowing onto the cracked stone floor, and also flowing into that seemingly illusory sea of blood. The sea of blood was broken, but it did not disperse. On the contrary, as Zhou Tong's true blood flowed in, it became even more berserk, the stench of blood thickening. A hand reached out from the sea of blood from the darkness. It was Zhou Tong's left hand. There were already countless wounds on his palm, his skin and flesh split open and covered in blood. Even the flesh on his middle and index fingers had been completely sliced off by the sword intent, leaving behind only white bones. It was an abnormally terrifying sight. It was just like the miserable state of the prisoners he often saw in the underground prison of this courtyard. His hand, which was completely broken, trembled slightly in the night wind, as if it could break at any moment, but it still firmly moved forward, reaching towards Chen Chongqing's throat. White bones emerged from a sea of blood. Under the bombardment of thousands of sword beams, Zhou Tong was heavily injured, but he did not die on the spot. He still had the ability to fight. He floated in the air, his entire body covered in blood. His red official robe had long been soaked through, dripping blood onto the ground. The front of the red official's robe had already been torn to shreds by the sword intent, revealing what was underneath. It was not his body, but an extremely bright soft armor that faintly exuded a divine aura. On the soft armor, near his chest and abdomen, was a small hole that was extremely difficult to see with the naked eye. Chen Chongqing's pupils constricted. He immediately recognized it. It was the supreme treasure of the Tianhai clan, the Six Protections divine armor. The extremely small hole on the Six Protections divine armor had been personally pierced by him last autumn in front of the Orthodox Academy. The stainless sword could break through the Six Protections divine armor, but that did not mean that other famous swords had the same ability. The Six Protections divine armor was the most famous soft armor on the tier of legendary weapons, and it could even be said to have an effect close to that of a divine artifact. It had succeeded in blocking the majority of those several thousand sword glows for Zhou Tong. Why was this divine armor on Zhou Tong's body? That left hand that was like white bones pierced through the darkness and the sea of blood, clawing at Chen Chongqing's throat. Zhou Tong's sinister and furious voice resounded in Chen Chongqing's sea of consciousness. Did you think that I would be completely unprepared? The great red official's robe, soaked in blood, madly danced in the tattered courtyard, spraying blood in all directions, as well as anger and hatred. The terrifying pressure of the sea of blood enveloped the area. Those several thousand bright sword glows broke through the sea of blood and soared into the night sky, unable to immediately return. Chen Chongqing used the Yesher step and continuously retreated. However, the sea of bitterness was difficult to cross, and the sea of blood was no different. No matter how his figure changed and changed, he ultimately still remained where he was, the stainless sword still unable to leave Zhou Tong's hand. With a crack, the white bone hand dripping with blood gripped Chen Chongqing's throat. Even though his body had been bathed in dragon blood, it could not endure the full-strength strike of the sea of blood-bone claw. Chen Chongqing's throat was completely shattered, but not a single drop of blood leaked out. Zhou Tong stood in front of him, his official's robe reeking of blood, like a wet swamp, making one desire to smell it. Chen Chongqing's face was very pale, but his eyes were very bright. Zhou Tong's face was very pale, his eyes very serene. This was the closest the two of them had been since the start of the battle, not even a foot apart. Was this the end of this desperate battle? No, Chen Chongqing did not think so. Zhou Tong also did not think so. Zhou Tong was the person who had killed the most people in the world and had seen the most death, so he was most afraid of death. He did not want to die. He had been cautious his entire life, and would not miss a single detail. He did not know that Chen Chongqing would come to kill him, but in these past few decades, someone could come to kill him at any time, so he was always prepared. Only when Chen Chongqing appeared in this courtyard once filled with crabapple blossoms did all his caution and preparations show their use. He knew how much ability Chen Chongqing had, how many fortuitous encounters. He knew of the three swords that Su Li had passed on to Chen Chongqing, knew that Chen Chongqing had brought out countless swords from the garden of Zhou. He naturally had the corresponding methods, like the star domain of the sea of blood transforming into a ball of blood in his palm, or the Six Protections divine armor hidden beneath his crimson official's robe. Was this all? No, he knew that Chen Chongqing still had some trump cards, such as the magical artifacts that Princess Luoluo had bestowed upon him back then, or that Su Li might have left behind some life-saving abilities for him, or that divine staff that the Pope had bestowed upon him. Thus, Chen Chongqing naturally still concealed a corresponding strongest move. Even though he was heavily injured, his flesh cut to pieces by the sword glows, he still did not use his strongest move, because he had always remembered that divine staff. That divine staff that represented the authority of the orthodoxy, that legendary divine staff that had the power to split the heavens and split the earth. It's already come to this, I'm already gripping your throat with my cruel fate. What are you still waiting for? Zhou Tong's eyes became abnormally deep and serene, shrinking like some monsters, seeming to become a straight line. He knew that in the next moment, Chen Chongqing would use the orthodoxy's divine staff and deliver his most decisive strike. He was waiting for that moment of light to arrive. Countless sword glows pierced through the sea of blood and into the night sky, but they still had not returned. A bloody hand of white bone gripped Chen Chongqing's throat. This was the moment he was closest to death, and also the moment Zhou Tong was closest to him. Chen Chongqing had been waiting for this moment. He had struck. Just as Zhou Tong had expected, the moment he struck, there was light. Zhou Tong's face was abnormally pale in the light, but there was no surprise or fear on his face, because everything was within his expectations. The blood-red official's gown glowed with a strange luster under the light. With the dripping of blood, a magical artifact exuding an ancient qi floated out of his sleeve and blocked the light. It was a mirror, its ancient qi tinged with mysteriousness. The surface of the mirror was as smooth as water, as if it could reflect all light. If Chen Chongqing could recognize this copper mirror, he would know that even if this copper mirror could not completely block the light of the orthodoxy's divine staff, it could still buy some time for Zhou Tong. In the shortest amount of time, that bloody hand of bone would be able to wrench his head from his neck. Yet this sort of thing did not happen. The depth in Zhou Tong's eyes was chased away by the light, revealing a tinge of fear. Because the light that had arrived in front of him was not a patch, but a ray. An incomparably bright light flashed through his eyes. Where did this light come from? It was not the sword glow that was rapidly flying back. Similarly, it was not the divine light emitted by the orthodoxy's divine staff. This ray of light was so pure, without the slightest impurity. It was only because of this that it seemed so terrifying. This ray of light was decisive, fierce, and breathtaking. Zhou Tong's eyes were the first to see this ray of light, so his eyelashes snapped. Soon after, a line of blood appeared in his eyes, snapping from the middle. The copper mirror that had floated out of his sleeve had no use at all, snapping from the middle. This fierce blade glow seemed to rise from the night sky and descend from the yellow springs, cleaving at him. An extremely shrill and miserable howl burst forth from his blood-stained lips. The countless magical artifacts he had brought with him all exploded, the courtyard seeming to explode with fireworks, yet they still could not stop the descent of that ray of light. His great red official's gown madly danced in fear. His body transformed into a gloomy shadow, retreating into the depths of the courtyard, but he still could not avoid the descent of this ray of light. The ray of light fell on his body. The laces of the 6 protections' divine armor were severed. His earlobe was severed. His shoulder was severed. His left arm was severed. Before this bright ray of light, everything, even the light emitted by the other sources of light and the night wind, was severed. This ray of light was a blade glow. The blade glow descended. A clear and perfectly straight line of blood appeared on Zhou Tong's face and body, extending from his left eye all the way to his ribs. With a light swish, a flower of blood flew out of his eye. His left cheek was blown away by the wind, his left shoulder was cut off, and his left arm fell to the ground. Only then did he heavily fall to the ground, vomiting a mouthful of blood so thick that it could not be dissolved. What sort of blade was this? Chen Chongqing walked into the ruins, his hand gripping the blade. This was the kitchen knife he had taken from the kitchen before leaving the Orthodox Academy. This was the most terrifying blade in the world, from ancient times until now. Before this blade, mountains and rivers would all be severed in two. Severed in two. Chapter 6:24. Chen Chongqing, shrouded in starlight, walked towards the ruined sea of blood. Through his clothes, it seemed like several hundred stars were faintly discernible. Zhou Tong lay in the ruins of the courtyard, constantly vomiting blood, no longer able to stand up. From the start of the battle, Qing Jun had been hiding in the shadows, but now that the entire courtyard had been destroyed, there were naturally no shadows, revealing his figure. As the only person to personally witness this battle, the leader of the great Zhou dynasty's redcoat cavalry had been in a daze for a very long time. Chen Chongqing had actually won? A heavily injured youth had actually defeated the peak star condensation Lord Zhou Tong in a direct battle. In this battle, the power Chen Chongqing had displayed had completely surpassed his imagination, surpassed the imagination of the entire world. At this time, Chen Chongqing had already walked up to the ruins, his face pale and on the verge of collapse. In this desperate battle, he had obtained the final victory, but he had also paid an unimaginable price. The true essence in his body had already been completely consumed. Even more frightening was that the price of forcefully breaking into star condensation had caused the meridians in his body to rupture once more. That blood, which contained boundless life, energy and danger, was currently flowing through his internal organs. A harsh light suddenly flashed through Qing Jun's eyes. In this battle, Chen Chongqing had displayed an unimaginable strength. Even now, he still could not understand just what that dazzling and violent blade glow was. But it was obvious that Chen Chongqing was on the verge of collapse and should not have the ability to continue fighting, so he wanted to gamble. His right hand rose in the wind and hung by his waist. At any time, he could take out his magical artifact and prepare to launch a sneak attack. Just at this moment, Chen Chongqing turned his head to glance at him. His gaze fell, his spiritual sense fell, and his mind moved. Above the ruins of the courtyard, countless mournful cries of swords resounded through the night sky. Soon after, countless sword glows descended from the sky. The several thousand sword glows that had left their sheaths to destroy Zhou Tong's star domain of blood followed Chen Chongqing's will and returned to the human world. An awe-inspiring sword intent enveloped the battlefield. The cries of swords ceased, and what followed was a very soft piercing sound, like a piece of cloth being pierced. Qing Jun lowered his head and saw that a bloody hole had appeared in his chest. Soon after, even more sword glows pierced through his body. More and more bloody holes appeared on his body. Thousands of sword lights, thousands of bloody holes. They were so densely packed that his body was covered in holes, and blood was spurting out everywhere. Because there were too many sword holes, the blood flowed out in an instant. The dim light at the back of the courtyard shone through those holes, making his body look like a unique lampshade. Qing Jun raised his head and glanced at Chen Chongqing blankly. Then, his body suddenly loosened and became a pile of flesh on the ground. Only his head remained relatively intact. Thousands of sword flashes passed through his body, swept across the courtyard, and then returned to Chen Chongqing's sheath. The two crabapple trees were reduced to wood shavings and leaves in the night wind. Dozens of houses with the courtyard as the center were all cut into ruins. Just like how shocked and confused Qing Jun was, even if Chen Chongqing forcefully broke into star condensation, logically speaking, he should not have been able to defeat a powerful expert on the level of Zhou Tong. But in reality, no one had ever seen his true strength. No one knew how strong he would be if he went all out. Su Yorong had a rough understanding, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. Zhou Tong only knew that he had many famous swords passed down through the ages and that he had learned the sword from Su Li, but he did not know that he had also practiced Wang Po's blade intent, much less that he had learned Zhou Dufu's having blade style. He knew that he carried the orthodoxy's divine staff, but he did not know that Su Li had left a letter in his bosom and that there were 5 heavenly tome monoliths on his wrist. Tonight's battle was the first time that Chen Chongqing had completely displayed his strength. No, even at the very end, he had not used all of his techniques because there was no need. Chen Chongqing had used what Zhou Tong knew about him and what he did not know to perfectly design tonight's battle and obtain the final victory. Back when they had returned south from the snowy plains, Su Li had taught him many things on the road. Marching armies and fighting battles, strategizing, he had used them all tonight. This was the true intellectual sword. From start to finish, all the details had been in his grasp. Of course, the key to his victory over Zhou Tong was still that final blade. In that blade, he had used Zhou Dufu's blade style, but he had borrowed Wang Po's blade intent. Wang Po's blade intent was straight. A blade that went straight to the point. Chen Chongqing did not know how a person should live their lives, but he knew that before he died, what he wanted to do the most was kill Zhou Tong. So he had come to the alley of the Northern Military Department and gone straight to the point. If he wanted to kill Zhou Tong, he could kill Zhou Tong. As he gazed at Zhou Tong lying in a pool of blood in the ruins, Chen Chongqing did not think about those famous ministers and great generals and innocent commoners who had died tragically in Zhou prison. He did not think about the dreadful torture that Zhixiu had once suffered in this place. Without thinking about anything, he let go of the kitchen knife, gripped the stainless sword in the wind, and walked forward. He only needed to take 2 steps forward, the sword would fall and Zhou Tong would die. He had no hesitation about this, no sympathy for the wicked, and certainly no explanation or funeral oration for the wicked. And yet, he suddenly realized that he could not walk over. His face had become abnormally pale. At this moment, he was like a child who had not recovered from a long illness. The night wind gently blew through the ruins of the courtyard. Both the sword glows and the sea of blood had already vanished without a trace. Some sort of law and principle faintly appeared in the breeze, blocking his steps. It was a law and principle that he currently could not break through, an existence that surpassed the scope of his current understanding, yet it was something that seemed familiar to him. He gazed into the depths of the darkness, wanting to see something, but ultimately, he saw nothing. Then he heard a few things. The light rustling of the night wind, the distant plaintive cries of autumn insects, the sound of the air being torn apart, the thundering of hooves on the street, the exhalation of experts, the sound of battle, and the splashing of blood. The courtyard returned to silence, and then the darkness was torn apart by an even deeper darkness. Tensome assassins of the Department for Purging officials transformed into tensome rays of black light and arrived at the scene. They had no time to be shocked by what had just happened, and immediately stood in front of Zhou Tong to protect him. At the same time, several assassins with cold qi rushed at Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing knew that it was probably impossible to kill Zhou Tong tonight. This fact caused his hand gripping his sheath to become somewhat cold, as did his body. He paid no attention to those assassins of the Department for Purging officials, instead continuing to gaze into the depths of the darkness, hoping that his opponent would appear and give a few words of explanation. But the darkness was still the same, so his breathing gradually became coarse. Only those closest to him knew that this meant that he was currently extremely angry. The person hidden in the darkness was probably also keenly aware of this point. The black-clothed assassins of the Department for Purging officials were like a part of the darkness, noiselessly arriving in front of Chen Chongqing. Without hesitation, they raised their poisoned metal thorns and thrust them at him. Chen Chongqing's true essence was already exhausted and his internal injuries were acting up, but logically speaking, he should still have the ability to fight. At the very least, he should not have been killed by these assassins. But he did not move. He only gazed into the depths of the darkness, his eyelids drooping, concealing the disappointment and faint sorrow in his eyes. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Several dozen piercing sounds rang out as many bright streaks of light appeared in the gloomy ruins of the courtyard. These streaks of light were crossbow bolts imbued with divine energy, originating from the divine crossbows of the Orthodoxy cavalry. Those black-clothed assassins groaned again and again as they desperately dodged, but they were still unable to escape the rain of crossbow bolts. They were shot and then transformed into plumes of smoke. Dense and hurried footsteps rang out, followed by the sound of a door being forced open and the sound of old roof tiles being trampled on. 100-some Orthodoxy cavalry from the Li Palace had at some point abandoned their mounts. From the main street they had leaped over houses and walls. In the shortest amount of time, they had completely surrounded the courtyard, at the same time tightly guarding Chen Chongqing behind them. Just as the orthodoxy cavalry charged into the office of the department for purging officials, a line of fire suddenly blazed high up in the night sky. Xue Xingchuan had come. His hand gripping his spear, he stood in front of Zhou Tong and the others, his expression cold and stern as he gazed at Chen Chongqing in the midst of the orthodoxy cavalry. Then he raised his right hand. With his action, the figures of many Imperial Guard soldiers appeared in the darkness behind the ruins of the courtyard. These soldiers wielded crossbows, the tips of the crossbows suffused with a gloomy and terrifying light. There was a deathly stillness as the two sides confronted each other. No one spoke, and no one dared to take the initiative to draw their crossbows. Everyone was staring at Xue Xingchuan's right hand. They knew that his right hand would assuredly fall, but they did not know whether it would fall gently or forcefully. These two actions represented two completely different wills. This also signified that tonight, the capital, the future great Zhou dynasty, would enter two completely different situations. Let's end it here. An elderly voice came from the back of the crowd. The crabapple tree in the courtyard had already been reduced to splinters, the house had already been reduced to ruins. Only the remnants of the stone arch leading to the outside world remained. Mao Chuyu and a Taoist nun dressed in a religious robe walked in through the broken stone arch. Xue Xingchuan's eyes narrowed as he recognized the Taoist nun dressed in a religious robe. It was none other than the Li Palace's Archbishop of the Divine Edict, Unlin, who was permanently stationed in the south. However, he did not know when she had returned to the capital. Two of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects had already appeared here. In Mao Chuyu's hand was a magical pestle faintly glowing with light. This was a precious treasure of the Li Palace. Chen Chongqing murdered a minister of the imperial court. Could it be that the Li Palace wants the imperial court to treat this matter as if it never happened? Xue Xingchuan did not turn to look, but he also knew that Zhou Tong's miserable condition was unknown. He said these words not because he was Zhou Tong's only true friend in the world, but because he was a divine general of the Great Zhou. He represented the will of the divine empress. Mao Chuyu walked up to Chen Chongqing and calmly said, "Lord Zhou Tong has murdered so many ministers of the imperial court in these last few years, but the imperial court has always treated it as if it never happened. As the next pope, Principal Chen, what does it matter if he occasionally does something like this?" The original title of the chapter was, "In the Depths of the Darkness There is a Voice." Because it exceeded the number of words allowed for the title, it was changed to this. Chapter 6:25. Hearing this, Xue Xingchuan narrowed his eyes even more and tightened his grip on his spear. He was the continent's second-ranked divine general, and his strength was far more formidable than ordinary peak star condensation cultivators, faintly surpassing those at the same level by half a level. Coupled with the fact that he was in the prime of his life, both his spirit and bearing were at their peak. Many people even believed that his strength had already surpassed Divine General Han Qing in the Mausoleum of Books. Even if Mao Chuyu and Enlin worked together and had that treasure of the Li Palace, Xue Xingchuan was confident in dealing with them, but could he really keep Chen Chongqing here? Just then, a massive boom suddenly came from the long street that ran parallel to the alley of the Northern Military Department, followed by the stamping of hooves and the collapse of buildings. Dust flew everywhere. The people around the ruins of the courtyard looked over and saw that the buildings along the street had already been destroyed, revealing the scene on the main street. Bright candles burned in lanterns and torches. The dim light of the long street fell upon the armor, but it did not give any warmth. At this end of the street were 18 cardinals of the Li Palace with profound cultivation, as well as several hundred orthodoxy cavalry wielding divine crossbows. At the other end of the street was a dense tide of soldiers of the capital's city gate department and the well-equipped imperial guard. At the very front was the austere Su Shiji himself. The The standoff between the imperial court and the orthodoxy had already lasted an entire night. At the start, both sides had been searching for someone, but now they were at daggers drawn, ready to strike at any moment. In truth, both sides had already struck. The collapsed buildings, the still unsettled dust, the corpses of cavalry lying in pools of blood on the street, the trail of blood at the corner of Su Shurji's lips, and the 3 heavily injured cardinals were all clear proof. The atmosphere on the street was abnormally tense and oppressive. Even the war horses could sense it and uneasily kicked their hooves. The person who ultimately ended this standoff was a person that no one had expected. Zhou Tong, covered in blood and on the verge of death, said, "I'm still alive." Yes, he was still alive. This was something that Chen Chongqing could not accept, but it was something that both the orthodoxy and the imperial court were willing to accept, because this meant that there was still room for a buffer. Now, Zhou Tong himself had spoken. A carriage drove over from the alley. The curtain was raised, revealing Prince Chen Lu's face. His handsome face was covered in worry, especially after seeing Chen Chongqing. "I've come to take him back," Prince Chen Lu said to Xingchuan, his eyes calm and fearless. After a few moments, Xingchuan slowly lowered his right hand and expressionlessly glanced at Chen Chongqing, then ordered his subordinate, Prince Chen Chongqing. The hoofbeats rose once more, still like thunder, but not as hair-raising as before. The cavalry of the imperial court and the orthodoxy followed their orders and slowly retreated into the darkness at the 2 ends of the street. "I've given everyone trouble," Chen Chongqing said to Prince, and then Chen Lu helped him onto the carriage. Chen used Chen, Prince Chen, he Chen. The night wind rustled the curtains, allowing him to see the alley of the Northern Military Department and that courtyard that he had never seen from the main street. He saw the Imperial Guards lifting Zhou Tong onto a stretcher. Zhou Tong's eyes were closed. His face was pale and his body was covered in blood. He looked just like a dead man. Even if the imperial doctors of the imperial palace could save him, this renowned treacherous official would have lost half of his body and soul. He would be no different from a cripple. But Chen Chongqing still found it impossible to erase the knot on his brow. "Am I being too daring, not caring for the greater good?" he asked Prince Chen Lu. Prince Chen Lu patted him on the shoulder and comfortingly said, "Zhou Tong is naturally not an ordinary official, but to the Empress, he will only be used if he is useful. If you really had killed him just now, would the Empress still take revenge for him? Would she have stirred up a war for him and killed the future pope? Of course not." In truth, he had not even finished his sentence. In his view, if Chen Chongqing was the Empress's own son, then his life was naturally more important than Zhou Tong's. Regardless of whether that rumor was true, even if the Empress wanted to kill Chen Chongqing, in her heart, Chen Chongqing's life was still 1,000 times, 10,000 times more important than Zhou Tong's. Prince Chen Lu's gaze passed through the curtain and fell on Zhou Tong's body. He harshly said, "He's a dog. Only a dead dog is a dog. As long as it's alive, it's still a wolf." Chen Chongqing recalled what Zhishyo had said to him in the past, and suddenly felt very tired. He said, "I wasn't able to truly kill him tonight, but I don't know if I'll have another chance in the future." He was keenly aware that at the very least, he would not have another chance to kill Zhou Tong. A person like Zhou Tong is naturally not easy to kill. For you to be able to force him to this state is already very extraordinary. As a member of the imperial clan, Prince Chen Lu could not possibly have any good impressions of Zhou Tong. More than anyone else, he wanted Zhou Tong dead, so he was more grateful than anyone else for what Chen Chongqing had done tonight. "I admire you very much," he said to Chen Chongqing. Thinking of the turmoil in the capital tonight and the tense situation on the street that could erupt at any moment, his expression also grew solemn. He had appeared on the street earlier and now sat in a carriage with Chen Chongqing, escorted away by the orthodoxy cavalry. This was tantamount to formally declaring his position to the entire capital and the divine empress. Chen Chongqing did not feel that there was anything about him that was worthy of admiration, because he had still not been able to kill Zhou Tong. In the Orthodox Academy, Zhexiu had once said that after he killed Zhou Tong, he would go to Mount Li to fetch Qi Jian. At the time, he, Tang 36, and the others had all felt that this was an impossible matter. An important figure like Zhou Tong was naturally very difficult to kill, but tonight, he had truly almost succeeded. If not for that final smear of darkness blocking his path. If not for a voice coming from the depths of the darkness falling directly into his mind. This was a voice that he was very familiar with, and also a voice that he had not heard in a very long time. At the time, in that courtyard shrouded in darkness, only Chen Chongqing and Zhou Tong were present. Chen Chongqing had heard that voice, and Zhou Tong had also heard it. At the time, he believed it to be a hallucination that occurred when he was on the verge of death. The darkness was so serene, so cold. He did not want to die, because death was an even more serene, even colder abyss. At the moment when he was the closest to death, all his sinister and terrifying shell was completely shattered. What remained was that malicious, petty, and cowardly him. After confirming that the voice was real, he unhesitatingly agreed to that person's conditions. As expected, that smear of darkness protected his life, but he could not feel a shred of warmth from it. On the contrary, he felt even colder. The common people all said that he, Zhou Tong, was a schemer on par with the demon military advisor, Black Robe, but upon hearing that person's voice, he realized that this saying was just a joke. In front of that person in the depths of the darkness, how could he have the right to discuss schemes? How could he be considered cold and emotionless? In that person's eyes, he was probably just a dog that still had some use. But even if he really was a dog, he still had to live. Even if he had to wag his tail and beg the entire world, even if his eyes shone with sorrow, he still had to live. As he thought of these things, his mind grew increasingly agitated. Zhou Tong could no longer resist the assault of his injuries and fainted. Under the personal escort of Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji, the heavily injured Zhou Tong was sent to the imperial palace. Only like this, only in this place, could he be assured of his survival. The news that Zhou Tong was heavily injured had probably already spread. In the capital at night, countless people wanted him dead. It was just like the situation Su Li had encountered on his return journey south. As they gazed at Zhou Tong lying on the bed, on the verge of death and in a terrible state, Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji remained silent for a very long time, not saying a single word. They didn't know what to say. Just how had Chen Chongqing done it? The horrifying and miserable wound from the left side of Zhou Tong's face to his ribs was exposed in the lantern light, a ghastly sight to behold. Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji were both people who believed that they understood Chen Chongqing very well, especially the latter. They could never have imagined that Chen Chongqing had such a valiant side. The sacred light master of the imperial court had come, the best imperial doctor of the palace had also come, and that old chief eunuch had also come representing the divine empress. Even after the diagnosis and treatment was concluded and it was confirmed that Zhou Tong would probably be able to keep his life, the empress still did not appear. "I will first take care of some business." Perhaps Su Shiji had been touched by something, but his complexion was rather unsightly. Just like that, he left the imperial city. Xue Xingchuan did not leave. He carefully cleaned Zhou Tong's wound, then moved a chair over and sat at the front gate of the palace. He closed his eyes, the spear held horizontally in front of his knees. No matter who wanted to kill Zhou Tong, they had to kill him first, because he was Zhou Tong's only friend in the world. In the world, Zhou Tong only had him as a friend. If even he left Zhou Tong, then Zhou Tong would really only be left alone. Everyone knew that Xue Xingchuan was Zhou Tong's only friend. This was also a matter that the people of the world had not been able to understand even after thinking for several decades. Xue Xingchuan was the second-ranked divine general of the continent. Han Qing had guarded the mausoleum for several hundred years, so he was the true leader of the divine generals. Whether it was his strength, his accomplishments in battle, or his achievements in the north, he could bear this reputation without shame. There had even been a saying that he and Wang Po were the two people with the greatest hopes of breaking through that threshold and entering the divine domain. Moreover, he had a rather good reputation. Whether it was in managing his army or his household, he was extremely strict, yet he just happened to be on good terms with the infamous Zhou Tong. In the past, some people had speculated that this might have been because of the Divine Empress. However, although the other divine generals loyal to the Divine Empress feared Zhou Tong, they had never taken the initiative to get close to him, not even giving him any good looks. No one knew why this was the case. The medical skills of the Imperial Palace's imperial doctors were truly brilliant, and the sacred light had also played a rather important role. Even though Zhou Tong had suffered such heavy injuries, it did not take long for him to wake up. Xue Xingchuan stood up and walked back to the edge of the cavern. Looking at the deathly pale Zhou Tong, he said, "Don't be in a rush to speak. Healing your injuries first." Zhou Tong ignored him, his voice weak as he asked, "Am I very much like a dog right now?" Chapter 6:26. At this moment, half of his shoulder and arm had been cut off by Qin Chongxing's blade, and one of his eyes was also blind. If he were to be described as a dog, then he was undoubtedly a stray dog. Xue Xingchuan frowned and said, "Just focus on recovering." Zhou Tong still did not listen to him. He struggled to turn his neck and looked towards the palace gate. He saw that chair and knew that Xue Xingchuan had previously been guarding there. He was silent for a very long time. Then he asked, "Did the Empress come?" The night sky was filled with stars, and the ground outside the palace was sprinkled with starlight, like water, very peaceful. Xue Xingchuan was silent for a while, then said, "You know, the capital is in a tense situation tonight. The Empress has to pay attention to the Li Palace." "Really?" Zhou Tong squinted his eyes like an old dog. The pain from his left eye made him frown, and his voice also began to tremble. "Then, did the Empress say anything?" This time, Xue Xingchuan was silent for an even longer time. Zhou Tong raised the corner of his lips, revealing an ugly and even somewhat terrifying smile. He looked at him and said, "You see, I really am just like a dog. Even if I'm about to die, my master won't care." Xue Xingchuan looked at him in silence for a while, then said, "When you were little, I told you that you didn't have to live like this." He was clearly heavily injured, but Zhou Tong somehow found the strength to say in a voice full of resentment, "If I didn't live like this, would I be like you?" Xue Xingchuan was silent again. "From the moment I was in the womb, I couldn't compete with you. When you were born, you weighed no less than 8 caddies, and me? Not even 5 caddies. That's fine, since my family was poor. No matter how I was raised, I was still like this, but Auntie Xue couldn't give birth to a son and wanted to secretly raise one, so she found our family. If it was me, I would also choose a white fatty like you, not a skinny monkey like me." Zhou Tong said. Later, Auntie Xue gave birth to another child and decided to pass the family business to her own son. Afraid that you would resent her, she secretly told you this matter before she died. I admit that after that, you treated your parents well, and you treated me even better, taking me to school with you and studying together, but did you ever think, why should I pretend to be your study boy and be with you? Xue Xingchuan replied, "In front of others there's nothing I can do, but in our own courtyard, I treat you like a brother." Zhou Tong said mockingly, "But that's only when there's no one around. In front of others, I can only see you and Xue he being brothers. Tell me, how do you think I feel?" Xue Xingchuan fell silent, no longer speaking. "I was congenitally deficient in my mother's womb, and even my cultivation talent couldn't compare to yours. If I hadn't later entered the department for purging officials, encountered that old ghost in prison, learned the secret technique of the great crimson gown, and then plagiarized all over the place, how could I have possibly cultivated to my current level? How can I compare to you? Zhou Tong expressionlessly stared at the ceiling of the palace, continuing, but there's a problem with the great crimson gown's secret art. Later on, I cultivated too many things, so there's no hope for me to reach that step in this lifetime. Meanwhile, you're walking step by step in that direction. I just don't understand. We're both twins, so why is there such a huge difference in our fortunes? After so many years, when I saw you once more in the capital, I did not expect that you had already entered the department for purging officials, but even if you began to change at that time, it was not too late. Too late to do what? If I don't sell my life for the Empress, if I don't kill for the Empress, I will lose the Empress's favor and I will be killed by those people. Be at ease, the Empress will give you an explanation, Xue Xingchuan consoled. Yet in the depths of his heart, not even he believed these words. Just then, footsteps came from outside the palace. The one who came was not the divine Empress, but the medical officer delivering the medicine. After a careful examination, the medical officer carefully carried the wooden table containing the medicine to the bed. From the moment the footsteps came, Zhou Tong had been staring at the medical officer. His face was very pale, but his eyes exuded a strange and fierce light. Xue Xingchuan knew what he was thinking, how disappointed and even despairing he was, but he could do nothing to console him. Taking the medicine bowl from the medical officer's hands, he single-handedly propped him up and prepared to feed him the medicine. Zhou Tong gazed at the black medicinal liquid in the bowl, sensing the divine qi and medicinal fragrance contained within. The expression on his face suddenly became rather strange. "What's wrong?" Xue Xingchuan asked. Zhou Tong's voice trembled slightly, inexplicably causing one's heart to palpitate. "I am not at ease. It's not that bad." Xue Xingchuan knew what he was worried about. Looking at him, he seriously said, "The Empress is not that sort of person. I've done more things for the Empress than all of you combined. I know better than all of you what sort of person the Empress is. In any case, I'm not at ease." Zhou Tong's voice was getting sharper and sharper, and because of his injuries, his breathing was somewhat lacking. It sounded like a broken bellow whooshing. At this moment, he looked like a stubborn child. Because he did not like the bitterness of medicine, he turned his face away and tightly shut his mouth. Even if he was beaten to death, he would not drink this bowl of medicine. Xue Xingchuan looked at him in his arms and thought about how, many years ago in the old estate, he had also refused to drink medicine just like this. He couldn't help but reveal a smile of reminiscence. Once these matters in the capital were finished, he would have someone send him back to the old estate to retire. He believed that besides the Empress, himself, and Xue He, no one else would know where he was. As Xue Xingchuan thought about these things, he raised the bowl of medicine and drank a mouthful. "Look, this medicine is fine, and it's not bitter." Many years ago, when he coaxed Zhou Tong into drinking medicine, he had done this. He would first drink a mouthful for him. Zhou Tong looked at this scene and suddenly began to cry, sobs coming from his throat. Xue Xingchuan was also somewhat moved. After Zhou Tong finished crying, his mind was even more exhausted, but he was much more relaxed. He looked at Xue Xingchuan and forced a smile. "I've thought it through. It's fine as long as I'm alive." Xue Xingchuan was very comforted. "It's fine as long as you've thought it through." When the carriage returned to the Orthodox Academy, it was already surrounded. The armies of the imperial court and the cavalry of the Orthodoxy stretched from the main street to 100 Flowers Lane, and then to the perimeter of the academy walls. Chen Chongqing got off the carriage and bid farewell to Prince Chen Lu. Under countless gazes, he walked into the Orthodox Academy. The gate of the Orthodox Academy was pushed open, revealing the brightly lit interior. Although it was already late at night, Not a single one of the several hundred teachers and students slept, because tonight no one could sleep. The sword array formed by the female disciples of South Stream Temple had already been moved from the base of the small building to the back of the academy gate. Sensing the awe-inspiring sword intent, one could be sure that if the soldiers of the imperial court wanted to force their way in, they would have to pay an extremely heavy price. But for some reason, the faces of these female disciples did not have their usual calm and confidence. Instead, there was some worry. "Where did you go?" Tang 36 asked him. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were also looking at him. Chen Chongqing had left the Orthodox Academy 4 hours ago. He had gone to the bottom of New North Bridge, to the Plum Garden Inn, and finally to the alley of the Northern Military Department, doing many things. Because of his departure, the situation in the capital had suddenly become tense. The Orthodoxy Cavalry and the Imperial Guard had arrived one after the other. The people of the Orthodox Academy naturally knew that something had happened, but they did not know what it was. The battle in the alley of the Northern Military Department had just concluded. Tang 36 had people in the capital, but the news did not travel any faster than Chen Chongqing's return. "It's fine. Everyone, go to sleep." Chen Chongqing indicated that Su Mo you should lead the teachers and students to rest, and then he brought Tang 36 and Zhishio to the small building. The sword array of South Stream Temple naturally moved with him. In a short while, they had arrived by the lake. Su Mo you had also hurried back. "Are you really fine?" Tang 36 looked into his eyes and very seriously asked. They knew of Chen Chongqing's current condition and could not tease him as they usually did. They had originally believed that after Chen Chongqing left the Orthodox Academy, he would not return. Who could have expected that he would return so late at night? This made them feel much more at ease, but it was impossible for them to completely relax. "I'm really fine," Chen Chongqing said. "I just went out to take care of a few things." "What things?" "I went to kill Zhou Tong." Hearing this, the area in front of the small building instantly became incomparably quiet. The night wind lightly brushed against the great banyan tree, but could not ruffle its leaves. It lightly brushed against the surface of the lake, but no ripples could be seen. Everyone was shocked, especially the girls of South Stream Temple. The mood in the capital tonight was abnormal, as if a storm was brewing. Zhishio and the others had guessed that it had something to do with him, but they had not expected that he had gone to take care of such an important matter. There were countless people in this world that wanted Zhou Tong dead, but how many of them dared to put these thoughts into practice? Su Mo you looked at him, his face brimming with admiration. The girls of South Stream Temple looked at him, their eyes suddenly brightening, thinking, "No wonder he is the man the temple master likes, truly extraordinary." "I said before, Zhou Tong is someone I want to kill." Zhishio looked at him and said, "Seeing how special your current situation is, I don't blame you." Chen Chongqing looked back at him and said, "Back then, you were imprisoned in Zhou prison because of my relationship with the Orthodox Academy, so I always wanted to finish this matter before leaving." "Leave? Go where?" Upon hearing this, the girls of South Stream Temple were rather confused and doubtful. Tang 36 and Su Mo you understood the meaning of the word leave, and the slightly excited mood they had just felt instantly chilled. "I said before, just add more money," Zhishio said. Chen Chongqing did not argue with him over this matter, saying, "My apologies, I was not able to kill him." A voice rose from among the girls of South Stream Temple, "Daring to kill him is very impressive." The speaker was Yi Xiaoyan, once a worshipper of Qiushanjun, later a worshipper of Chen Chongqing, and now a worshipper of Su Yorong. Tonight, she suddenly felt that liking Chen Chongqing was a very reasonable matter. Chen Chongqing noticed that the mood of the girls of South Stream Temple was somewhat strange and asked, "What happened?" Yi Xiaoyan uneasily said, "The temple master still hasn't returned." Chen Chongqing thought this over, then asked, "Perhaps she's staying the night in the imperial palace?" Yi Xiaoyan shook her head and said, The temple master said that she would definitely return at nightfall. If she doesn't return, hearing this, Chen Chongqing, Tang 36, and the others finally realized that there was a problem and their expressions turned grave. Chapter 6:27. The Holy Maiden said that if she cannot return, we will have to trouble little Principal Chen to temporarily lead us. The girls of South Stream Temple solemnly bowed to Chen Chongqing, their white dresses fluttering in the wind. Don't worry, the Divine Empress treats her as her own daughter. Out of respect for you, His Holiness will not do anything to her. After returning to the house, Tang 36 explained to Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing knew that this was true, but why had Yorong given such an order to the girls of South Stream Temple before going to the Imperial Palace? Did she know that it would be very difficult for him to leave the Imperial Palace? Why? What did she want to do in the Imperial Palace? Was she still in the Imperial Palace? He unsheathed his sword and threw a set of flexible armor in front of Tang 36. Remember to help me deliver this to Scholartree Manor and give it to Wang Po. The flexible armor was covered in blood, some deep and some shallow, and there was also an extremely thin sword hole. Only the tie had been cut, so it should be very easy to repair. Suemo Yu and Zhixio did not know what sort of flexible armor this was, but Chen Chongqing had specifically ordered it to be delivered to Scholartree Manor for Wang Po. The Tang clan was the wealthiest in the world, so Tang 36's insight was naturally extraordinary. Hearing the words Scholartree Manor and Wang Po, he very quickly guessed what it was. This is the 6 Protections Divine Armor? He picked up the flexible armor from the ground and asked Chen Chongqing in shock. Suemo Yu and Zhixio were also dumbfounded. Yes, this was originally the Wang clan's. It just so happens to be returned to Wang Po. He should be very happy. Chen Chongqing then took out a bronze mirror and handed it over. I don't know what this is, but it should also be a good item. If my guess is correct, it should be able to restrain the orthodoxy's light energy. This bronze mirror had probably been prepared by Zhou Tong to deal with the orthodoxy's divine staff. It had not been of much use in the previous battle, but the fact that it had remained intact under the halving blade made him feel rather interested. Tang 36 took the bronze mirror and gasped, "The mirror of pure virtue?" Chen Chongqing only knew that the Li Palace had a hall of pure virtue, but he did not know that there was a mirror with the same name. Zhixio arched his brows. Suemo Yu could no longer hold back. He walked up to Tang 36, took the mirror, and carefully used his sleeve to wipe away the blood. Is this bronze mirror very famous? Chen Chongqing asked. You never look at the tier of legendary weapons? Tang 36 countered. Its position on the tier is even higher than your stainless sword. Chen Chongqing was startled. He thought to himself that when he chopped down with his kitchen knife, he didn't see anything special about this bronze mirror. What exactly did you go to do? Kill Zhou Tong or rob him? Tang 36 carried the 6 Protections divine armor and walked in front of him. He was speechless. How could you have gone out for such a short time and brought back 2 weapons from the tier of legendary weapons? Chen Chongqing said, These are all Zhou Tong's belongings. When I killed him, I conveniently took them back. After a moment of silence, Zhixio and the other 2 looked at each other. When they found out that Chen Chongqing had gone to kill Zhou Tong, they were very shocked, but they did not ask for too many details. This was because they had never imagined that Chen Chongqing would actually be able to accomplish such a task. Moreover, Chen Chongqing had later admitted his failure, but if he really was no match for Zhou Tong and had relied on the protection of the powerful figures of the orthodoxy to return, then how could he have obtained these 2 treasures from Zhou Tong? They turned to Chen Chongqing, waiting for his explanation. Chen Chongqing recounted what had happened in the courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department, but he still did not go into too much detail. You actually won? Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at a monster. Chen Chongqing replied, Since it was a battle to the death, victory and defeat are meaningless. Tang 36 said in shock. But in the end, you still won. Chen Chongqing paid him no more attention, saying, See what you want to do with this bronze mirror. If it's not easy to divide, then it can be left in the Orthodox Academy to be used as Academy property. Tang 36 was displeased by these words. Last words are things that only need to be said once. Do you really have to constantly remind us that you're a person about to die? Chen Chongqing thought it over, then replied, These are not last words, but the matter of inheritance. In the view of many people, the palace hall in the deepest part of the Li Palace did not suit the Pope's status. This was because there were too many flying eaves outside the palace hall, cutting the sky into the shape of a well. Perhaps this was the origin of the word courtyard? But there was also an advantage. If one stood in the courtyard and looked up, they would often be able to see the neatly cut starry sky, a very beautiful sight to behold. The night gradually deepened, the darkness also gradually deepened. It was even like an invisible cloud obscuring the stars in the night sky. The chilly winds of the early autumn could not disperse it no matter what. A voice arose from the depths of the darkness. This voice was very calm and indifferent, tinged with nostalgia and the vicissitudes of time, yet it also gave off the feeling that this nostalgia and vicissitudes was something that he intentionally wanted others to hear. It's been almost 20 years since I've seen the night sky here. Just like many people in the capital tonight, the Pope had not gone to sleep. He had just finished watering the green leaf potted plants and was using a silk handkerchief to carefully wipe the water droplets off the leaf. When he heard the voice coming from the darkness outside the hall, he stopped what he was doing and slowly turned around. If you had not been too impatient back then, perhaps the story of these 20 years would not have occurred. The Pope said to the depths of the darkness. The person in the darkness replied, Perhaps it's just that I didn't expect that you would ultimately still stand on her side. Hearing these words, the wrinkles on the Pope's face seemed to deepen. He slowly said, It's all in the past. The voice in the darkness said, Yes, it's all in the past. What we should be talking about is the present, the matter of tonight. The Pope placed the silk handkerchief by the green leaf potted plant and walked to the stone steps outside the hall. Gazing into the darkness, he said, Even now, I am still not very clear on just what you want to do. The chilly night wind blew against his hemp robes, making them seem as if they were about to leave the world. The voice in the darkness sank, as hard and indestructible as metal or stone. You have always been well aware of what I want to do, but back then, you did not agree with my view. Now that 20 years have passed, you know that your judgment back then was wrong, so you must stand at my side. After hearing these words, the Pope lowered his head to look at the shadow on the stone steps, sinking into a long silence. Tianhai possesses the best bloodline and talent, possesses the best position, but she is a woman. Her vision is limited, and there is a problem with her personality. The past 200-some years of history have long since proved this point. If she continues to sit on the imperial throne of the Great Zhou, even if the confluence of the north and south proceeds smoothly, the human race will still not be able to defeat the demons under her leadership. The wind rustled the green trees outside the hall, the green leaves within the hall, and the light spilling out from the majestic and imposing great hall of light behind them. All of this seemed to waver. This was because the person in the darkness spoke once more, his voice even colder and more certain. Do you want the entire country to be exterminated? Do you really want to see the descendants of the Chun imperial clan's bloodline destitute, wither day by day until their lineage is severed? When we parted in the Orthodox Academy, we had already agreed that I would be responsible for continuing the imperial clan's bloodline while you would stay in the capital and watch over her for a while longer. 20 years have passed just like that. Could it be that you've already forgotten your original thoughts and are intoxicated by the arrangement of two saints sharing the same sky with her? No, in Xining village, I used my indifferent eyes to look at you for more than 10 years. I will not allow you to continue degenerating like this. Now is the time to lay my cards on the table. I will not allow you to continue guarding this uninhabited palace. If you cover your eyes, you will pretend that you do not see all these messy matters in this world. The Pope lowered his head to look at the faint shadow left behind by the eaves on the stone steps and fell silent for a very long time. After some time, he raised his head to the depths of the darkness and asked, "Just where does your confidence come from?" The person in the darkness replied, "No one can resist that sort of temptation. The ripe fruit is just on the branch, waiting for her to pluck it." The Pope replied, "That child once said to me that only a saint can resist it, but she has always been a saint. The so-called saints of the current world are just a joke. How could a greedy and shameless woman like her truly comprehend the principles of the divine? If she truly believed that eating that fruit would allow her to defy the heavens and change her fate to perfection, allowing her to enter the great realm above the concealed divinity, do you think she would be able to endure it? Do you know that night when he was 10 years old, when the fragrance filled the air, how much pain I endured? If that greedy and foolish golden dragon had not once again braved the danger of falling cultivation to descend, and I had gone into the cloud grave to fight it, I might have eaten him back then." The voice of the person in the darkness became cold and cruel. Let alone the fact that in her view, this was something she had to do in order to defy the heavens and change her fate, the most merciless request of the heavenly Tao. The fruit that fell from her body was ultimately eaten by her. How could there be a more perfect cycle of the heavenly Tao? I could not see it, so how could she see it? The Pope's voice became somewhat tired, carrying with it a guilt that could not be easily released. "In the end, you still succeeded in deceiving me, and also deceiving Mei-Lisha. Back then, in your letter, you did not say who needed to be sacrificed in this matter, much less that the person to be sacrificed was him. When a fruit is ripe, it has to be eaten by someone, whether it's poisonous or not. At the beginning, I believed that by allowing the fruit to ripen as quickly as possible, it could be planted into the fertile soil as quickly as possible, helping it grow into a towering tree. When the fruit is ripe, if it is not eaten by someone, it will eventually rot. In any case, that child will die. What problem is there in using his inevitable death to exchange for such a great benefit for all of humanity? But that child himself does not know all this. Everyone has their own things that they want to do, but not everyone can make decisions for their own fate, have the right to choose. Could it be that only you have the right to choose? Because I can provide you and this world with the best choice. Do you know what sort of choice I and this world need? Mei-Lisha wholeheartedly wants the imperial clan to return to its position, while you only care about the continuation of the human race. He is the son of Tianhai and Emperor Xian, so no one will oppose him. Moreover, please believe me, he is the continent's most intelligent and most extraordinary youth. He is the most suitable successor to the great Zhou imperial throne, and also the most suitable future leader of humanity. But that child is also your disciple. The voice in the darkness disappeared for a very long time, and then it spoke up once more. But first and foremost, he is a member of the imperial clan. From the first moment he existed in this world, he had to bear the responsibility for the continuation of the imperial clan, to bleed for the imperial clan. Chapter 6:28. The Pope gazed into the depths of the darkness and said, "This is sending him to his death." The person in the darkness indifferently replied, "What does death count for? So many members of the imperial clan died back then." The Pope was quiet for a very long time, the sea of stars in the depths of his eyes gradually growing calm. "You are not a member of the imperial clan, so why have you never been able to let go of these matters?" The voice in the darkness was calm and firm. "This is His Majesty's final decree." The Pope knew that the His Majesty he spoke of was naturally not Emperor Xian, but that most extraordinary sovereign since ancient times, Emperor Taizong. This conversation had begun many years ago with a letter sent from Xining village to the capital. This debate had begun 2.5 years ago, when that youth called Qin Chongqing walked into the abandoned campus of the Orthodox Academy. It seemed that this conversation should end tonight. But even now, the Pope still had not made up his mind. Just like the green leaf in the pot, it gently swayed in the wind. This did not mean that he did not have his own standpoint, that his Tao heart was not firm enough. On the contrary, it was precisely because he had to consider too many things, far and wide and meticulous, that he found it very difficult to make a decision. Other than me, no one knows that you are most skilled in the scroll of time, the canon of flowing west. In the darkness, a gaze seemed to fall on the small pool in the hall, and then on the wooden ladle by the pool. The person said to the Pope, "You are the gurgling clear water flowing west. Although you have been flowing for 1,000 years, you are still unstained by a speck of dust or filth, so clear that the bottom can be seen, so calm and gentle, yet filled with an inexhaustible divine power. Then, you do not need to make a decision now. At the final moment, you will ultimately discover what your heart is." After saying this, there was no more sound in the darkness. The Pope stood on the stone steps, gazing at the shadows cast by the eaves, standing in front of the sound of flowing water, the green leaf slightly swaying in the wind. "Senior brother, you cultivate the Tao of following your heart, so you are so confident that my heart will follow yours?" After leaving Xining village, Yuren followed his master to many places, but whether it was the snowy plains of Mount Han or the wilderness beneath Snowhold Pass, he did not like them very much. There were too few people, and White Emperor City on the shore of the Red River did not leave a very deep impression on him. Only when he heard that the demi-human princess was his junior brother's student did he feel somewhat happy. He had been in a good mood these past few days, not because this was the capital, his hometown. He had been raised by his master since he was a child. He only had some vague memories of his childhood, but he could no longer remember them clearly. His master had told him that he was from the capital and had lived here before, but he could not remember where his home was. Furthermore, he did not like the capital. The reason he did not like the snowy plains and wilderness was that there were too many people in the capital. There were too many people in the capital and too few in the snowy plain. It would be best if Xining village had an equal number of people. He did not know why his master had brought him to so many places, or why they had come to the capital. He was only worried about his junior brother's health, and wanted to meet with him. However, after his master had brought him to the mausoleum of books, he had quietly disappeared. He had also instructed him not to leave the mausoleum of books, saying that in a few days, he would naturally be able to meet with his junior brother. Seeing his master's disappearing figure, he thought about it and felt that this was also good. No matter what his junior brother encountered, his master would always be able to resolve it. Moreover, there were truly too many people in the capital, and he really did not like it. The people in the mausoleum of books were neither too many nor too few. There were green trees and flowing water, and it was very easy for him to think of the mountain behind Xining village, and that stream, as well as the happy days he and his junior brother spent together memorizing the Taoist canon and catching fish to eat. He had heard that when his junior brother had viewed the monoliths and comprehended the Tao, he had drawn down a sky full of starlight. This made him very proud and happy, and so he felt that he had even more reasons to like this place. There was also another very important matter. In the mausoleum of books, one could view the heavenly tome monolith. He had studied the Taoist canon since he was a child, and other than the last of the 3,000 scrolls of the Great Tao, he had long since mastered them. Although he was the same as Qin Chongqing and his master had not taught him how to cultivate, he naturally felt a sense of closeness towards the heavenly tome monoliths that hid the truths of the Tao. He wanted to see some interesting things from them. When his master had left the mausoleum of books, he had told him not to leave, but he had not said that he could not view the heavenly tome monolith. He prepared 2 days' worth of food in that small courtyard, and then leaned on his cane as he stood by the fence and watched the sunlight change twice. Feeling that there should not be any problems, he took his packed lunchbox and left the plum garden, following the mountain path towards the mausoleum. There was still a long period of time before the grand examination. Because of last year's opening of the Garden of Zhou and the Boiling Stone Summit, as well as the many unforeseen events that had occurred afterwards, the monolith viewers of the Mausoleum of Books had left the mausoleum one after another. The number of cultivators remaining in the mausoleum was much fewer than in previous years. He walked on the mountain path for a very long time, but did not encounter a single person until he arrived in front of the first monolith hut. In front of this monolith hut, he encountered a monolith guardian called Ji. That monolith guardian had a very gentle temperament, and he had an indifference and ease that seemed to have seen through the affairs of the world. He gave Yu-Ren a very good impression. He thought to himself, the Mausoleum of Books truly is a holy land for cultivation. After viewing the monoliths for a long time, could it be that one's temperament would undergo such a transformation? The monolith guardian called Ji asked him which sect he was a disciple of, and why he had entered the Mausoleum of Books at this time to view the monolith. Yu-Ren did not know how to answer. Fortunately, he had never been able to speak. He placed his cane on the pillar of the pavilion and used one hand to make a few gestures, but he did not know if the monolith guardian would be able to understand. Ji could not understand his sign language, but he could clearly see Yu-Ren's handicap. He felt sympathy and did not ask any more questions. He even reminded Yu-Ren not to force himself when viewing the monoliths and to pay attention to rest. As he watched the monolith guardian depart along the mountain path, Yu-Ren wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. A smug smile appeared in his eyes as he thought to himself, "My junior brother is wrong. How could I not deceive people? It's just that in Xining Village, I don't need to deceive people. Look, I've succeeded in deceiving a senior." The first heavenly tome monolith of the Mausoleum of Books was the reflecting monolith. Yu-Ren slowly dragged his legs over to the monolith and gazed at it. He was somewhat curious, somewhat excited, and even could not help but extend his hand to touch it. He felt that this heavenly tome monolith was truly very interesting. That poem written by a virtuous predecessor was truly wonderful. His fingers felt very comfortable, ice-cold, just like that small stream on the mountain behind Xining Village. Then, he arrived in front of the second heavenly tome monolith. This heavenly tome monolith was also very interesting. He looked at it with great interest, feeling that those lines were very beautiful, just like the rays of light cut by the leaves on the mountain behind Xining Village in autumn. Then, he arrived in front of the third heavenly tome monolith. This heavenly tome monolith was even more interesting. The marks on the monolith were still clear, the lines still beautiful, but they were not as complicated as the first two monoliths. In his eyes, they had become extremely simple lines. Simple did not mean that they were not beautiful, nor did it mean that they were easy to understand. It was just like when it rained in Xining Village, the lines of water that slid down the eaves of the old temple, as well as the traces left behind by the yellow leaves that had been knocked down by the rain. In order to understand the pattern in those traces, Yu-Ren spent quite a bit of time this time. He even put his cane to the side and sat on the ground to think for a while. And then, the fourth heavenly tome monolith, the fifth heavenly tome monolith, the sixth, the seventh. After some time had passed, Yu-Ren arrived in front of a monolith hut. Leaning on his cane, he slightly tilted his head and looked at the monolith under the hut. He felt that it was rather strange, because that monolith was broken. He did not know where the original monolith had gone. He did not know that this broken monolith had been cut down by a person called Zhou Dufu. With this broken monolith as the boundary, he had seen those heavenly tome monoliths. They were all called the monoliths of the front mausoleum. He knew that his junior brother had very smoothly viewed the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books last year, making him very proud, But he did not know about the saying of viewing all the monoliths of the front mausoleum in one day. He raised his head to look at the sky and realized that the sun had not yet reached its zenith. The weather could not be considered too hot, so he decided to continue viewing. It had not even been half a day since he had entered the mausoleum of books. How to view the broken monolith? He also did not know. He slowly walked in front of the broken monolith and stretched out his hand to touch the broken stubble on the monolith. After a while, he withdrew his finger and thoughtfully looked around. He realized that he was still in front of the broken monolith. He switched sides of his cane and used his broken arm to hold it. He used his free right hand to scratch his itchy back. He was somewhat confused and thought to himself, "How should I go next?" The autumn wind in the mountain mausoleum gently blew, lifting up the Taoist robe that had been washed white and lifting up the black hair on his forehead, revealing his eye. He had one eye that could not see, but he did not know if he could see anything else. He walked to the forest behind the monolith hut and used his hand to push aside the thorny branches of grass. He curiously looked inside. He could faintly make out a path there. It had probably been trampled out, but it was almost covered in weed. No one knew how many years it had been since anyone had walked on it. Seeing that it was difficult to stand on the small path, Urin's face revealed an awkward expression. However, after thinking it over, he still used his cane and hobbled inside. The weeds gradually drowned out his figure, and the desolate path gradually extended under his feet and the cane. After some time, he finally walked out of the forest and arrived in front of another monolith hut. He raised his arm and used his sleeve to wipe the sweat off his face. He felt his face heat up and thought to himself that it was fortunate that he had not gotten lost, or else it would have been troublesome and he would not have been able to call for help. He walked to the monolith hut and began to view the monolith. This was no longer the front mausoleum. Of the 13 mausoleums of heavenly books, he had already arrived at the second mausoleum. After Zhou Dufu had broken the monolith in the mausoleum of books, he was the first person to directly walk to this place. Of course, he did not know any of this. He continued to view the monoliths, continued to advance, looking at monolith after monolith. When he felt hungry, he would take out a lunchbox from his bosom and eat. When he was hungry, he would find some mountain water to drink. The food in the lunchbox was very simple: green peppers stir-fried with cured meat. He had found the cured meat on the beam of the kitchen in some abandoned courtyard. He had picked the green peppers from an untended vegetable field. The sun set and the stars rose into the night sky. The sun rose and the stars retreated behind the light. The clear streams in the mountains slowly flowed, just like time. After some time, Urin realized that his lunchbox was empty. Whether it was the green peppers stir-fried with cured meat or the fermented bean curd, there was nothing left. He was truly rather hungry, so he retraced his steps. As he walked past those monolith huts, he finally saw a few cultivators. In the last few days, he had only seen the silent forest and monolith. Now that he could finally see people, Urin was rather happy and nodded to those cultivators in greeting. But those cultivators looked at him like he was a ghost. Who was this person? Why had they never seen him before? Why had he come back from the front? Had he already seen the next heavenly tome monolith? Chapter 6:29. Returning to the courtyard, he prepared a meal. After eating his fill and preparing several lunchboxes, Urin once more walked towards the mausoleum of books. When he reached the straight path at the foot of the mausoleum of books, he suddenly changed his mind and turned to the right. The sky was fine and there were many people in the mausoleum. He had just met them, so if he met them again, he would feel that it was a little too close. Moreover, did meeting them again mean that they were acquaintances? Or acquaintances that he was not familiar with? Then would nodding his head in greeting be considered lacking in etiquette? These problems were very troublesome and Urin was not very skilled in dealing with them, so he decided to take another path to the mausoleum of books. He did not know that for the vast majority of cultivators in the world, there was only one path to enter the mausoleum of books. In the dense forest, he had tried many times, but he had never succeeded. Because his legs were inconvenient, he had even fallen a few times. His body was covered in grass and pine needles, making him look very wretched. He felt rather helpless, thinking, "Why can't I find another path?" Then, he saw a path in the mountain. This path was made of white stone, and in the sunlight it seemed like jade. This path was very straight, and it led directly to the highest point of the mausoleum of books. Urin happily walked up this path, but when he got close, he found it rather strange, because there was not a single person on this path. This path was the straightest and shortest path to the mausoleum of books, so why was no one walking it? Could it be that the monolith viewers wanted to sharpen their willpower, so they deliberately did not take this shortcut? When he thought of this possibility, and then thought of the joy he had felt when he saw this straight path, Urin felt rather ashamed. But he glanced at his own legs and thought, in the end, I'm different from ordinary people, so taking a shortcut is not too shameful? With a hint of shame, he used the crutch to walk up the mountain path. With his legs, crossing those clear and shallow canals was truly inconvenient. Just by walking to the bottom of the path, he felt rather tired. Fortunately, there was a pavilion there that he could rest for a while. Walking to the pavilion, he looked at the bronze statue covered in dust and rust. He thought to himself, if my junior brother saw this, how sad would he be? This was referring to Chen Chongqing's obsession with cleanliness. Urin glanced at the straight mountain path and thought to himself, climbing it will definitely take a lot of energy, so I might as well rest here and save up my strength. As a result, he sat down next to the bronze statue. But he still felt a little uncomfortable. Growing up with Chen Chongqing, the two of them influenced each other and both had a slight obsession with cleanliness. After some thought, he took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and walked to the side of the pool. He bent down with some difficulty and wet the handkerchief. Then, he walked back to the bronze statue and began to carefully wipe it. He had just polished the statue's left shoulder when he suddenly heard a voice coming from the statue's armor. The voice was very low and not loud. It could not travel far, but in his ears it was like thunder. I just need to wipe the helmet a bit. The autumn wind stirred the clear water in the shallow canal and brought up the dust in the armor. It was quiet under the pavilion. Urin stared at the bronze statue in a daze for a very long time, thinking in shock, it's actually alive. When Chen Chongqing first entered the capital, he had no understanding of the common sense of this world. Urin had grown up with him, so he was naturally not much better off. He did not know that the straight mountain path was the divine path, that no one besides the Tianhai Divine Empress and the Pope could step upon it. He also did not know that the statue of the general under the pavilion was not a real statue, but a real general, the number 1 divine general of the continent who had guarded the mausoleum for more than 600 years, Han Qing. But at least now, he knew that this person was alive, and from the dust and rust on the armor, this person had probably been sitting here for a very long time. Sitting here for so long, wasn't it boring? Although Urin did not like interacting with people, and was not skilled at doing so, if he asked himself honestly, if he did not see a person for many years, he would still find it boring. There was also a very important problem. If this person sat here the entire time, how could he eat? Thinking of the problem of eating, he subconsciously took out a lunchbox and placed it in front of the armor. He gestured and asked, "Are you hungry?" No voice came from the armor. Urin thought it over, then made a few more complicated gestures, meaning, "How about I cook a bowl of noodle soup for you?" A voice came from the armor. "Just leave it here. In addition, you cannot walk this divine path." Urin placed the lunchbox on the ground and bowed. After glancing somewhat reluctantly at the divine path, he leaned on his cane and walked back. Not long after he left, The autumn sun once more descended upon the shallow canal and the pavilion, stirring up the dust in the chinks of the armor. Two serene and time-worn eyes lit up in the depths of the helmet. Han Qing opened his eyes. And then, he closed his eyes. A lunchbox quietly lay on the ground in front of him. Following the path he had come, Yuren returned to an unknown heavenly tome monolith, and continued to view the monolith. Perhaps it was because this heavenly tome monolith was too profound and difficult to understand, or perhaps it was because he was pondering some matters, but this time, he stood in front of the monolith for a very long time. Even in the dead of night, he was still here. He was somewhat hungry. At this moment, a drizzle suddenly began to fall from the night sky. He moved into the monolith hut, took out the remaining lunchbox, placed it on the top of the heavenly tome monolith, and began to eat. The night rain was not heavy, but the sound was rather annoying. Yuren put away the lunchbox and leaned against the heavenly tome monolith, gazing out of the hut. This place was already high up in the mausoleum of books. His gaze pierced through the gauze-like rain, and he could see the lights of the capital. Perhaps because it was too late, the lights in many houses had already been extinguished, making the capital seem rather gloomy. Yuren once more began to worry about Chen Chongqing. He believed that his master could assuredly resolve his junior brother's problem, but what about his junior brother's illness? Suddenly, he sensed something. Gazing at a certain place in the night sky, he slightly creased his brow. He did not understand what sort of feeling this was. There were no stars in that place in the night sky. It was a high platform. The dew platform. There was someone on the dew platform. The Tianhai Divine Empress held her hands behind her back and stood at the edge of the high platform, calmly gazing at the night sky. Tonight, many clouds had suddenly drifted over the capital, making it seem like an even deeper night, so it was naturally impossible to see the stars. But how could the darkness and clouds obscure her eyes? It was just like how the light emitted by the night pearls and the drizzle falling from the sky could not touch her body. A solemn expression appeared on her beautiful face, because she could clearly sense that the heavenly Tao had changed. Was this fate? Her fated star was high up in the sky, faintly gloomy. Perhaps it was because her other fated star was in the capital. That was the bane of her fate. What should she do? Wave her sleeve to obscure the light of that star? But what use would that be? If she really did this, then it would be very difficult for her to truly defeat the heavenly Tao in the future. But if she did not do this, could she defeat the heavenly Tao now? Chen Chongqing knew that he did not have much time. This time, he truly did not have much time. In order to kill Zhou Tong, he had paid a great price. Blood was currently flowing through his organs, his meridians were already in tatters, and the layer of sacred light Su Yorong had enveloped his body was already growing thinner and fainter. At any moment, he could send out the most fatal temptation to all life in this world, and at that moment, he might die. How much time did he have left? 1 day or 2? 1 song or 1 cup of tea? Without the slightest hesitation, he took the yellow paper umbrella from under his bed and jumped out of the window. Tang 36, Zhixiu, and the others did not sleep. Some were standing guard outside the room, some were standing guard on the tree, but they could not stop him from leaving again. Even if Zhixiu sensed his departure from the great banyan tree, he would probably grant him his final freedom, because the youths of the wolf tribe had grown up in the savage and bloody snowy plains. They knew that death should be peaceful. The drizzle fell on the yellow paper umbrella, but it did not make a pitter-patter. It was so gentle that it seemed to moisten him. Holding the umbrella, he walked into the forest on the side of the lake and then turned back. In a short while, he arrived at the perimeter wall. In the depths of the forest was a gate that led straight to the imperial palace. On this wall was a gate that Luolua's subordinates had opened. But he did not use either gate, because he could not be sure that the people of the imperial palace or his martial uncle, the Pope, would not send people to stand guard behind these gates. He glanced at the old wall covered in moss and lightly brushed past it. After this year's spring winds and autumn rains, the 100-herb garden that he and Tang 36 had once ransacked was now once more exuberant with life. Many precious herbs and spirit fruits quietly watched him from the gardens and on the branches, waiting for him to pluck them. But he did not look sideways as he walked deeper into the garden. The last place he wanted to go was the Imperial Palace. He wanted to confirm that Su Yorong was safe. He wanted to see the Tianhai Divine Empress. He wanted to ask her a few things. He wanted to ask her if those things were all true, if she was his mother, and then that was enough. In his bosom was still the letter that Su Li had left behind, on his wrist were still the 5 heavenly tome monoliths that had transformed into stone pearls, and he still had the Garden of Zhou. But he was not prepared to do anything in the Imperial Palace. It was truly enough. What scheme, what overall situation, what righteousness, what war between the humans and demons. To a person who was about to die, what did it matter? And who would have the heart to ask him to do anything at this time? He only needed to know a few things and then quietly depart. No one could decide how they came to this world, but when they left, everyone hoped that they could be clear-headed. Many people had said this before, and he had also said it, so he had to do it. But he could not enter the Imperial Palace, because in the forest deep within the 100-herb garden, he saw a scene that he had seen before. There was a stone table in the forest, and on the stone table was a teapot cast from iron. Next to the teapot were 2 teacups. Based on the color of the tea in the teacups, tonight was probably brewing white tea. The person drinking tea was still that middle-aged woman. Seeing her calm expression, Chen Chongqing was somewhat surprised. Chapter 630. He had met this middle-aged woman many times, so he wasn't unfamiliar with her. He had thought about her identity many times, but he couldn't find any clue. He felt that she was very mysterious, but she must be someone important in the royal palace. Tonight, a storm was brewing in the capital. The drizzle had already arrived. With this middle-aged woman's status, logically speaking, she shouldn't be here. Chen Chongqing suddenly thought of a possibility. He felt that the drizzle that fell on his face became a bit cold. Or was she here to kill him? Fortunately, this didn't happen, or else he would really feel a bit sad. The middle-aged woman pointed her finger lightly, as usual, indicating for him to sit down and drink tea. Chen Chongqing let out a sigh of relief. The forest in the herb garden was very meaningful to him. This was the place that could calm his mind the most in the capital. In the past 2 years, the nights that he sat across from this middle-aged woman and drank tea were the times that could calm his mind the most in the capital. If the middle-aged woman chose this forest, this stone table where he drank tea, to kill him, he would feel very unhappy. He really liked this feeling of sitting silently. It was very comfortable, very free, and very easily made him think of Xining Village. His eyebrows slightly frowned because he didn't like to think of Xining Village right now. Fine, but the stream behind the old temple was still clear. His eyebrows slowly relaxed. Looking at him frowning, looking at him unfurling his brows, looking at the immaturity between his eyebrows, she then remembered, oh, in a few days, he will be 17 years old, but isn't that fake? But he really is an amazing kid. Seeing that he was about to die, he could still stop his steps, pick up the warm white tea beside the table in the forest, and even daydream about other things. The corner of Tianhai's lips slowly curled up. There was a hint of a smile contained within. If this young man really is my son, maybe it's a good thing. At least he won't embarrass me too much. This way, when I watch you die, maybe I can feel more of the feelings I want to feel, and then I can find the hidden traces of the way of heaven in the starry sky, and finally obtain true freedom. The corners of Tianhai's lips gradually flattened at an extremely slow speed, and the smile disappeared without a trace. She quietly looked at Chen Chongqing, extended a finger and pointed at the center of his eyebrows. Chen Chongqing woke up. He was a little surprised, but he didn't dodge. It wasn't that he didn't want to avoid it, but that he couldn't. Whether it was when he first entered the capital or now, no matter what she wanted to do to him, he had no way of objecting. In the beginning, he wasn't used to it, especially when she grabbed his chin and caressed his cheek. He felt humiliated, but later, maybe he got used to it. His fingertips touched it lightly, and an extremely faint explosion sounded in his sea of consciousness, as if a bubble had been popped. The night wind blew through the 100-herb garden, bringing with it the fragrance of herbs and spiritual fruits, as well as other scents that only she could smell. Because in that instant, her finger had pierced through the sacred light that Su Yurong had laid down. Her spiritual sense had brought along this gentle breeze, and within the breeze was his presence. She quietly closed her eyes and carefully sensed the aura. Her expression gradually became calm and gentle. That aura was like a spring breeze, intoxicating. It was hard to imagine who would be able to resist the temptation if it was completely released. She opened her eyes and lightly tapped the table, signaling Chen Chongqing to drink tea. Chen Chongqing held the teacup in his hand, took a sip, and then put down the teacup. He looked at the middle-aged woman, wanted to say something, but closed his mouth. Finally, he couldn't help but say it. "I may not come here any more." He paused for a while, looked at her and continued, "I am Chen Chongqing." She quietly looked at him, her expression didn't change. Chen Chongqing was a little surprised at first, but then he laughed at himself. They had met so many times in 2 years. With the middle-aged woman's unfathomable strength, she obviously knew his background. "Since you know who I am, then you probably know my current situation." He lowered his head and looked at the tea in the teacup. His voice was also as light as water. "Until now, I still don't know who you are. Maybe because of this, I always feel that there are some things that I can't say to others, but I can say them to you." She quietly looked at him, still didn't have any reaction. In Chen Chongqing's view, or in other words, he was willing to take it as a kind of encouragement. He thought it over and then said, "I'm about to die." Then he began to narrate his story, starting from before he was born, which was of course the result of the Elder of Heavenly Secrets calculations. Then he talked about after he was born, which was the scene that Senior Yuren had described to him, the clear stream and the golden dragon. Then he talked about his life in Xining Village's old temple, and then he talked about coming to the capital to break off the engagement and the events that happened afterwards, up to the present. When he was in Xining Village's old temple, no one spoke to him, so he developed a taciturn personality. Only after he came to the capital did he become much better, especially after he got to know Tang 36. Occasionally, he would show his nagging side. When he was with Su Yurong, he also had many things he wanted to say, but none of them spoke as much as he did tonight. He combed through his entire life, and then recited it to her. The demon lord went to Mount Han. At the time, I had my suspicions, but I didn't have any proof, but the current situation is very clear. I know that Master is using me. He concluded, but I've always had that illness. In the end, it's a problem of fate, so who can I blame? No matter what he said, she only quietly listened, occasionally taking a sip of tea, her expression very calm. It was as if Xining Village's old temple, the Golden Dragon, the Sacred Light Continent, Chen Xianba, Zhou Dufu. These names did not shock her in the slightest. After he finished speaking, Chen Chongqing's mouth was somewhat dry. Only after he finished drinking the tea in his cup did he realize that she was a little too calm. This made her in his eyes even more mysterious. "My lady, just who are you?" he asked curiously as he looked at her. The 100-herb garden was very quiet. There was not even a gust of wind, so there was naturally no sound of wind. The drizzle had suddenly stopped, so there was naturally no sound of rain. Even the mournful cries of the insects at the foot of the wall and in the grass had disappeared. After a very long period of silence, a voice suddenly rang out. "Who am I?" Chen Chongqing was abnormally shocked, because these words had come from her. He could clearly hear that these 3 words had come from her lips. He had always believed that she could not speak. In these 2 years, it had always been him speaking. She had never said a single word. However, it turned out that she could speak. She just did not want to speak. Just who was she? Amidst his shock, Chen Chongqing suddenly felt an intense weariness and unease. Because she stood up. She suddenly became incomparably tall, like a mountain had suddenly appeared between the heavens and the earth. She slowly placed her hands behind her back. With a light wave of her sleeves, a gale arose in the forest. She looked down at Chen Chongqing, her expression indifferent. The temperature in the forest dropped by several degrees. The night wind lightly brushed against her face. Her 2 eyebrows extended towards her temples, like swords about to take flight, and even more like 2 wings waiting to be flapped. Her eyes became exceptionally clear and spirited, as if there were stars within them. That ordinary face, in the space of a few breaths, became the most beautiful face anyone could imagine. The qi exuded from her body became incomparably powerful. Who was she? She was of course the Tianhai Divine Empress, the sole sovereign of the heavens and the earth. The forest of the 100-herb garden became even quieter. Chen Chongqing held the teacup and was so shocked that he forgot to put it down. After some time, he came to his senses and placed the teacup on the table. He was silent for a very long time. Then he looked at the teacup and said, "Hello?" It was a very simple word, a proper etiquette, but it should never have appeared between the 2 of them. His voice was very calm, but his emotions were unimaginably complex. At the same time, he understood a few things. When Su Yorong entered the garden of Zhou, she had also changed her appearance. No one had been able to see through it. Afterwards, she said that it was a secret technique of the 13 divisions of radiant green. But he was well versed in the Taoist canon and had never heard of it. At this point, he naturally understood that Su Yorong's method of changing her appearance was the same as the Divine Empress's. Perhaps it was because the phoenix could change its form? "Shouldn't you call me mother?" the Tianhai Divine Empress said to him. When she said this, her voice was very indifferent, but it was hard to tell if she really was devoid of emotion. Chen Chongqing raised his head and gazed at this woman so beautiful that it was impossible to look directly at her. He thought to himself, "Is this my mother?" In the years since his master picked him up from the stream and brought him back to Xining Village's old temple, he had naturally pondered this question countless times. Who were his parents? But he had never been able to find an answer. Only when that rumor began to spread through the capital last year did he once more begin to confront this question. Then, some time ago in Mount Han, he obtained a certain degree of confirmation. Whether before or after the rumor, he would occasionally think, if they met, what sort of scene it would be, what sort of things he should do. Even when he jumped out of the window of the Orthodox Academy's small building and resolved to go to the Imperial Palace to face her, he was still thinking about these questions. Yet when they truly met, he realized that all his preparations were meaningless. His mind was somewhat absent-minded, his body somewhat cold. He gazed at her indifferent and emotionless beautiful face, unable to find even a sliver of the feeling that he had once attempted to possess, such as warmth. The Tianhai Divine Empress sensed the change in his mood and arched her brows. "Useless thing, I shouldn't have given birth to you back then." As she said this, her brows were like swords, seemingly about to fly into the night sky in the next moment. Coupled with the indifference on her face, she gave off an even colder feeling. Chen Chongqing was somewhat angry. Breathing heavily, he said, "I just went to kill Zhou Tong." For these words to appear at this moment was rather abrupt, rather baffling. The Tianhai Divine Empress replied, "You want to prove that you have some use? Have the courage to face this world? Ask me for a few candies to eat?" Chen Chongqing thought to himself, "It's not like that. I just want to tell you that there are some things that you don't care about, and I can also not care about. I have the courage to kill Zhou Tong, so I have the courage to face you. even if we are mother and son, even if you are a mother so callous that she would personally kill her own son. Chapter 631. Zhou Tong is just a dog, a servant. The Tianhai Divine Empress indifferently said to him, "And you are my son. Even if you are about to die, even if you are about to die by my hand, even if you can only live for one more day, as long as you live, you will be 1,000 times, 10,000 times more important to him. If you don't even have this understanding, what right do you have to be my son?" Chen Chongqing recalled that Prince Chen Lu had said almost the exact same words in the carriage. He did not sigh over this, only felt that these words were rather strange, not conforming to his understanding of the world. "Since you want to cold-bloodedly and mercilessly kill me, why do you care if I have the right to be your son?" He didn't know what to say, so he fell silent once more. The Tianhai Divine Empress extended a hand to caress his face. 2 years ago, this sort of scene had occurred. He was very opposed to it and found it very difficult to get used to it. Now, he felt somewhat disgusted. Who were those doting and tender eyes meant for? And why had this intimate caress appeared? Was this hypocrisy, or was this self-consolation? Or did you just want to use this to soothe your Tao heart, to ensure that after killing your son, your mind would not be affected? Chen Chongqing felt like a venomous snake was slowly slithering across his face. This feeling of extreme loathing caused his body to uncontrollably tremble. He could not continue to endure it. He wanted to avoid it, but his body could not move. He wanted to take out the letter Su Li had left behind, but he could not even move his fingers. "You want to kill me?" The Tianhai Divine Empress looked into his eyes and asked. For some reason, even though she had sensed Chen Chongqing's intentions, she did not get angry. Instead, a hint of a smile appeared in her eyes that were like the stars. This was a smile of praise, as if she was very gratified that Chen Chongqing had such rebellious thoughts about his mother. Chen Chongqing only wanted to leave, but he had no such thoughts. Seeing her eyes, he knew that she had misunderstood something, but he did not understand why she would have this sort of reaction after misunderstanding. The cycle of the heavenly Tao, the principles of the heavens, human relations, they are all fake. Mother and son killing each other, father and son killing each other, have already happened countless times in this world. I also very much want to kill you, so I do not feel that there is anything wrong with you wanting to kill me. On the contrary, if you can disregard those hypocritical and uninteresting morals and principles and want to kill me, only then can you truly be qualified to be my son. The Tianhai Divine Empress looked at him and said. Chen Chongqing looked at her and asked seriously, "You really want to kill me?" The Tianhai Divine Empress replied, "I said before, those were all fake. This being the case, why can't I kill you?" After a moment of silence, Chen Chongqing asked, "Then what is the truth?" The Tianhai Divine Empress gazed at the imperial palace, remaining quiet for a very long time. She was now in the herb garden. The imperial palace and the herb garden were the places where she had lived for countless years. Many years ago, she saw a dragon horse that was difficult to tame in the imperial palace. Emperor Taizong asked everyone how to make this dragon horse obedient. She volunteered to go forward, and then she was banished to the herb garden. For the rest of her life, she would never forget the contempt and loathing in Emperor Taizong's eyes when he looked at her. In the 100 Herb Garden, she lived an unimaginably bitter life, and her clansmen were even more miserable. Just when she thought she was going to sink into oblivion, the former emperor did not forget about her and quietly came to this place. Then she understood one thing. Emperor Taizong despised and loathed her so much. This meant that there was definitely something on her that made him feel uneasy. What was it? Was it strength, the potential for formidable strength, the rarely seen bloodline of the true phoenix, an omen faintly revealed by the heavenly Tao? In terms of understanding of the heavenly Tao, there was probably no one in the world who had a deeper understanding than her. But even she would sometimes feel a little exhausted. Yes, not frustration, not confusion, but exhaustion. Because reaching the other shore, entering the world of true freedom, required far too many years. She turned to Chen Chongqing and prepared to say something, but she realized that Chen Chongqing's face had paled, and at the same time, an abnormal smear of blood appeared at the corner of his eyes. His injuries had finally erupted. His blood, which contained his soul, sacred light, or the energy of life, had broken through his meridians that were already riddled with holes, constantly seeping through and flowing through his internal organs. The sacred light on the surface of his body was no longer able to completely conceal this smell. In the dark forest of early autumn, the cries of countless insects suddenly rang out. The Tianhai Divine Empress calmly gazed at him, seeming particularly callous. Such a dense qi of life. The smell is truly not bad. I truly did not make a mistake. This was the conclusion she had reached when she had extracted a strand of qi from Chen Chongqing's body. So those remnant races really did go to the sacred light continent. No wonder even with Emperor Taizong's abilities, he still could not find them after 200 years. Chen Chongqing felt particularly uncomfortable at this moment, as if tens of thousands of small knives were scraping at his bones. But when he heard these words, his attention was still somewhat diverted. He knew who she was speaking of. The remnant races referred to a portion of the Chen imperial clan that had fled the capital after the coup of the 100 Herb Garden. This portion of the Chen imperial clan was either the crown prince's family or members of the imperial clan close to the crown prince. This naturally included the family of Chen Xuanba. According to the records in the Taoist canon, this portion of the Chen imperial clan had no less than 1,000 people, and they were all extremely talented. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had said that his body contained countless strands of sacred light, which was assuredly related to the sacred light continent. His senior brother had said that he had been picked up by a stream, and that stream had flowed out of the cloud grave. Su Yorong had once said that the solitary mountain in the cloud grave might be the path to the sacred light continent. When these pieces of information were put together, the original appearance of this matter was gradually beginning to appear. He truly was the Chen imperial clan's hope, or perhaps the method, to reclaim the imperial throne. The Tianhai Divine Empress sensed the thickening scent of the autumn forest, and her brow furrowed deeper and deeper. The bright star in the depths of her eyes faintly wavered, the light also growing somewhat dim. At the same time, her face revealed callousness, loathing, and other emotions that were not completely opposite, but should not have appeared at the same time. In the next moment, she closed her eyes. When she opened them once more, those emotions had completely vanished, leaving behind only calmness and indifference. She lightly waved her sleeve, and an indescribable pressure instantly enveloped the entire autumn forest. Several rays of clear light spilled out from her sleeve and fell on Chen Chongqing's body. That qi that was enough to make all living beings in the world crazily crave was temporarily cut off by these rays of clear light. The insects in the 100 Herb Garden that had been desperately calling out gradually ceased their cries in confusion. The autumn forest once more returned to silence. The Tianhai Divine Empress gazed at Chen Chongqing's expression and mocked. "Now you know that you've been used by someone, right?" Chen Chongqing was quiet for a very long time. With some difficulty, he raised his right hand, trembling from pain, and gripped the already empty teacup. "I've never seen those people." The people he spoke of naturally referred to the descendants of the deceased hidden in the darkness, those descendants of the Chen imperial clan that had already left the continent for many years. There are some people that you don't need to see to know how despicable, and shameless they are because their blood is stinky. The Tianhai Divine Empress held her hands behind her back and gazed into the distant east, emotionlessly saying, "A father killing his own son, a younger brother killing his older brother. This sort of thing has happened far too many times in this clan. I still remember that when Taizong reigned, when Crown Prince Chengqian was executed, Wei Wangtai entered the palace to see Emperor Taizong. The moment he saw Emperor Taizong, he threw himself into Emperor Taizong's bosom and cried out, "Only from today onwards can I be considered your Majesty's true son. I have a son, and when I die, I will definitely kill him for your Majesty's sake and then pass him on to your beloved Prince Jean." At this point, she turned to Chen Chongsheng and asked, "After hearing these words, how do you feel?" Chen Chongsheng's body was still trembling, both because of pain and because of his emotions. "I feel very nauseous and also very cold." With a faint smile, the Tianhai Divine Empress said, "At the time, everyone who heard these words felt the same as you, but our Emperor Taizong didn't seem to think this way. He felt very gratified, even saying, 'Who doesn't love their son?' When we saw Wei Wang like this, we felt great pity for him." Chen Chongxing thought to himself, "Emperor Taizong is hailed as a wise sovereign throughout the ages, so how could he be tricked by such childish and absurd words?" Emperor Taizong naturally wouldn't be tricked, but he truly admired Wei Wang's shamelessness. He had just killed his older brother and already wanted nothing more than to burrow into his father's bosom and suck on his breast. This sort of thing is not something that just anyone can do. Everyone says that the son is like his father, and Emperor Taizong also did this back then. How could he still have the nerve to criticize Wei Wang? When the Tianhai Divine Empress mentioned Emperor Taizong, her words became rather harsh, even rather vulgar. Chen Chongxing raised his head to look at her. "Why is my lady saying these things to me? Previously, when my lady thought that I wanted to kill you, you felt very gratified. Is it for the same reason?" The Tianhai Divine Empress replied, "I just want to tell you that the Chun imperial clan, whether it's Taizong's lineage or those descendants of the deceased, are all hypocritical and disgusting things." After a moment of silence, Chen Chongxing said, "The blood of the Chun clan also flows in my body, so I must also be hypocritical and disgusting?" The Tianhai Divine Empress replied, "You can understand my meaning this way." Chen Chongxing looked into her eyes and said, "In the end, my lady only wants to kill me, so you're just finding a reason or an excuse." The Tianhai Divine Empress looked at him and mocked, "If I want to kill someone, when have I ever needed a reason or an excuse?" Chen Chongxing replied, "But in the end, I am different." The Tianhai Divine Empress arched her brows. "How are you different?" Chen Chongxing replied, "In the end, I am your son. If you are like Emperor Taizong, caring about how the history books of later generations will write it, then you will still have to give an explanation." The Tianhai Divine Empress replied, "I, a woman, sitting on the imperial throne, have never had the extravagant hope that the later generations will give me a good evaluation. Do you think that I am someone who cares about discussion?" Chen Chongxing thought about the callous methods she had used to handle the affairs of the imperial court after ascending to the throne. This truly was the case, but there were still some other problems that needed to be resolved. He said, "Every person has to give an explanation for their own choices. Even if they don't care about how the world sees them, they still have to convince themselves." The Tianhai Divine Empress calmly gazed at him and said, "Perhaps it's like this." Chen Chongxing asked, "Since I've already finished speaking, what is my lady waiting for? Kill me or eat me, complete the heaven-defying change of fate, complete all karma, and assist my lady for thousands of autumns and tens of thousands of generations." The Tianhai Divine Empress replied, "Reasonable. You were originally a piece of meat that fell out of my stomach. For me to eat you into my stomach is truly a matter that is justified by the heavens and the earth. Because I was afraid of disturbing everyone's reading, I've always restrained myself from nagging everyone. Now let me say something. I really did write with great care, even though the number is not much. In truth, I've always been saving up drafts for the terrifying October itinerary. At the beginning of October, there might be a signing. Yes, it's that legendary signing that I would never do even if I was beaten to death in the past." Chapter 632. The dark forest was silent, the cicadas in winter silent, the autumn insects silent. The tea on the stone table was already cold, the lantern already extinguished. Suddenly, a soft rustling came from some place in the forest. The two of them looked over and saw a squirrel running across a tree at high speed. This squirrel was very fat, its furry tail dragging a gray shadow behind it. It looked very cute. Seeing this sight, for some reason, Chen Chongqing forgot about his impending death, a fate even more wretched than death. An innocent smile appeared on his face. The Tian High Divine Empress did not smile. She only quietly gazed at the squirrel, her thoughts inscrutable. She waved her sleeve as if to brush away some emotions that she did not like. The cute squirrel was currently jumping from tree to tree when it transformed into a flower of blood in midair. Chen Chongqing froze, somewhat sorrowfully asking, "Why?" The Tian High Divine Empress did not answer his question. What answered him were the sounds rising one after another from the dark forest. These sounds were very oppressive, popping and popping, like a leather bag filled with wine that could no longer endure the pressure inside, and suddenly burst open. A middle-aged man staggered out from behind a tree. His chest and abdomen had already sunk in, as if he had been directly crushed by some kind of terrifying force. His eyes, nose, mouth, and ears kept spurting blood. Before he could say anything, he collapsed. Chen Chongqing recognized him. He was one of the 3 cardinals of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. He had come to find Chen Chongqing, or perhaps to protect Chen Chongqing on the orders of the Li Palace. Now, he had died before Chen Chongqing's eyes. Those oppressive sounds continued to echo. In the dark forest of early autumn, tensome flowers of blood exploded out, whether on the trees or in the fallen leaves on the ground. Each flower of blood represented the death of an expert of the orthodoxy. In the darkness even further away, a few orthodoxy experts that had not been affected were forced to reveal themselves and scatter in all directions, but how could they possibly outrun the wind piercing through the forest? As he gazed at this terrifying, almost bizarre sight, Chen Chongqing's body and mind went cold. These people currently dying were all rarely seen experts in the world, but in front of the Tian High Divine Empress, they were powerless to retaliate. The Tian High Divine Empress's hands were already held behind her back, the wind from her sleeves still piercing through the forest. The merciless slaughter continued. People died from time to time, and the scene was indescribably tragic. Chen Chongqing shouted that it was enough. He thought his voice was loud enough, but she didn't seem to hear him. He could feel the blood in his voice, but she didn't seem to feel anything. Dozens of incomplete corpses lay quietly in the dark forest. The Tian High Divine Empress impassively gazed into the darkness and once more raised her right hand. A painful groan suddenly sounded in the darkness, and then a person was forced out of the darkness. The person who came out of the darkness was Lu Qing. The sword in his hand was bent out of shape, and his clothes were torn all over, with blood constantly flowing out. He knelt amongst the fallen leaves, gazing at the Tian High Divine Empress behind Chen Chongqing. His eyes were filled with shock and reverence, but not fear. Su Li and that mysterious assassin had both left the continent. He, who had already cultivated to the peak of star condensation in Mount Han, was unquestionably the strongest assassin in the world. But it was simply impossible for him to get close to the Tian High Divine Empress, and even his secret technique to conceal himself in the darkness had been seen through by her in a single glance. It was practically a joke. After encountering the Demon Lord in Mount Han, he was already keenly aware of the gap between him and those true experts of the divine domain. He understood just how laughable it was for Su Li to insist on bringing them into the capital to kill the divine empress was, but he had still come to the capital. Because he was an assassin, this was something he should do. Assassins would always die, and to be able to die in an assassination attempt on the continent's strongest expert, he had nothing to be dissatisfied about. He even felt very excited. Neither Su Li nor his elder sister had truly exchanged blows with Tianhai. Although he had been defeated, as expected, he had still tried, and Tianhai really was that strong. As he gazed at the Tianhai Divine Empress by the stone table, Lu Qing's breathing became rather hurried, his eyes very bright, and he seemed rather excited. The Tianhai Divine Empress slightly raised her brows. She knew that Lu Qing was a person of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. Originally, out of respect for the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, she had not intended to kill him, but now she was prepared to kill him, because she did not like being looked at like this. Perhaps it was because he had been watching her every move this entire time, or perhaps it was because there really was some sort of mysterious connection between them, but when he heard the rustling of the fallen leaves on the table and saw her raise her brows, Chen Chongqing knew that she was prepared to kill Lu Qing, just like how she had callously killed those Li Palace priests. Lu Qing had saved Su Li in Xuanyang City and helped him on Mount Han, so Chen Chongqing naturally did not want him to die, so he was very worried, especially when he heard the faint thundering of hooves outside the walls. He guessed that the Orthodoxy cavalry had heard the commotion and were currently hurrying over. If he could not stop her from continuing to kill, then tonight, the Orthodox Academy and the 100 Herb Garden were highly likely to become a terrifying graveyard. But he currently could not move, could only make very small movements above his neck, so he could only attempt once more to use words to persuade her. He looked at the Tianhai Divine Empress and pleaded, "Please let them go. They're all low-level cavalry and have nothing to do with this sort of major event. As for him, he's always been a madman, so there's no need to kill him." The Tianhai Divine Empress lowered her head to glance at him, asking, "Why should I agree to your request?" Chen Chongqing fell silent for a few moments, then replied, "After all, you gave birth to me, but you did not raise me. I also do not ask for anything else, just this one request." The Tianhai Divine Empress's brows rose up once more, seeming to be mocking him. Chen Chongqing pretended not to see the change in her expression, continuing, "Why must you kill so many people? Isn't it enough for you to just kill me?" The Tianhai Divine Empress drew back her gaze and gazed at a puddle of blood on the fallen leaves. This puddle of blood had not been left by the Li Palace priests, but by the squirrel with the fluffy tail. For some reason, she gazed at this puddle of blood in silence for a very long time, as if pondering something. The hooves of the cavalry outside the academy walls grew closer and closer. One could faintly hear the chaos in the Orthodox Academy. Chen Chongqing could even hear Tang 36's shout. Time continued to pass and he grew more and more nervous. Suddenly, the Tianhai Divine Empress grabbed his collar. The night wind blew through the autumn forest and the two vanished. Lu Qing struggled to stand up from the fallen leaves, once more vomiting blood. He gazed at the now empty stone table, his expression somewhat perplexed. With the sounds of clashing and doors opening, several holes were torn open in the academy walls. The Orthodoxy cavalry and the people of the Orthodox Academy charged into the forest. Lu Qing turned and vanished into the darkness. Chen Chongqing felt his body lighten, and then he realized that he was in the air. The autumn forest of the 100 Herb Garden had become a distant blanket beneath his feet, the lights of the imperial palace had become the reflections of the stars in the river, and the blazing torches of the Orthodox Academy had also gradually faded into the distance. Soon after, he saw the distant Chu River, saw the dallying forest, and then he entered a cloud. Breaking through the clouds, the chilly night wind whistled over. The ground and those clear and shallow canals greeted him. His feet landed on the ground, and only then did he realize that he had already arrived at the Mausoleum of Books. In the next moment, his feet once more left the ground. This time, he did not fly but was lifted up. The Tianhai Divine Empress carried him like he was a chicken waiting to be slaughtered. Crossing the clear canals of the stone plain, they arrived at the very bottom of the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books. There was a pavilion there, and beneath the pavilion sat a person. His entire body was concealed in armor, making him seem like a bronze statue. Tonight, the capital was cloudy, and very few stars could be seen. When the Tianhai Divine Empress carried Chen Chongsheng to the pavilion, the clouds in the night sky parted by an extremely small crack. Starlight spilled down and fell upon the armor. The person in the armor woke up, and two distant and time-worn eyes appeared in the depths of the helmet. The Tianhai Divine Empress declared, "All those who ascend the divine path are to be killed." The person in the armor said nothing, only slowly raised his right hand and gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist. With this action, a few strands of dust flew out of the armor, as if more than 600 years of time had been contained within.